will be devoted to the work of Andrea CONTE, and after the break, Santiago ZABALA will give us his speech. Yeah, but we'll have time now for Andrea, 1 hour, and then a discussion that will last so long as we want. Andrea is a visual artist, an environmental engineer with a PhD specialized in sustainable resources management in different climate conditions. He's a multidisciplinary artist, performing in public spaces, painting murals, and making sculptures, and intervening sometimes also in nature. I have seen also some interests in anarchist ideas. I would say, I don't know if you're going to talk about that as well. That would be interesting. But for today, I think he's prepared something more related to sustainable projects and the awareness of these kind of things we need to develop. Yeah. His works have been shown at the Venice Biennale of Architecture, Saatchi Gallery, Macro Museum, as you will see in this short resume on the program. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Enrico.
Thank you for the introduction and good morning. And thank you, Isabella Santiago, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to share with you some of my project. And yeah, we'll talk about the Climate Art project. That is my main project between art, science, and activism. And but before that, I have to do a little introduction about my background. And my main artist practice is called nature as art, and this is at the background of the Climate Art project. So I have a long presentation. I hope I will skip some slide because it's difficult to choose for me which one is interesting, and I will. But feel free to interrupt me and ask me. Okay. So I decided to start with the Santiago statement that say that the greatest emergency is the absence of emergency. And I will not explain that because he will explain better than me. But I think this is connected of also what Andy Revkin, that is another person that I met in New York, that is the head of Art Institute of Columbia University. And he said, how do you convey urgency and complexity at the same time? So do you speak about emergency without simplifying? That is a issue, and because we know that global warming is an hyperobject, as Timothy Martin said. So an object so massively distributed in time and space that are difficult to localize and understand, and I will say to represent with art. And another concept that I'm interested in, that I believe the arts needs to be an act of resistance, something that envision possible future at the same time stimulate critical thinking. What is fundamental for me for solve these issues, of course, a must is to act and think in a multidisciplinary way. As we was saying yesterday night at dinner, that's something that is not only to see a problem from a different point of view, but is thinking with the contributes of different discipline and different part of the society, considering different part of the society. And this is a drawing that I did with all the influences of an artwork or that are related to future studies, philosophy, science, and of course also climate and environmental movements and civil society. And so a key is to think in an interdisciplinary way. Yeah, my main research is now overlap different research. It was artistic, scientific, environmental research, and also activism. So my artwork now are inspired by those things, the latest research on climate change, but also the activism related to the environment. And of course, we know that we are in a global environmental crisis, and there are some images that are very famous in science, like this graph about greenhouse gases, and that it became like an icon in science. This is called like the stochastic map graph that show how after the industrial revolution, how the greenhouse gases increase, and behind that there are the graph related to temperature rise and CO2. This is very famous in science. Also, how the temperature it will go in the future if there will be business as usual, the current warming rate, or the possible scenario of mitigation of temperature rise, and the other graph related to the sea level rise. And we know that now there are problems related to desertification. And these are how the desertification will change in the future. So just showing some graph. And this is the decarbonization graph. So it's to show the scenario of the future decarbonization. I show that because after would be present in my artwork. And yeah, I believe that as also as an introduction, for the decarbonization is not only a technical solution that we need, but we have to change the system of the society. So this was like a drawing that I made that was used for the climate march in Chicago, actually, back in 2019. Okay, going back to science, like my background as a researcher, I studied environmental engineering, and basically I did research on nature-based solutions. There are those solutions that use nature and the natural process to solve problems generated by human beings, basically. So from green infrastructure to phytoremediation and green roofs. And for many years I did, I believe in applied research. So I built prototype. This was the first green roof realized on the New University of Bologna. There was a project where I was involved, and with sensor I was monitoring the behavior of this green roof from climate change mitigation and from sustainable water management. And yeah, applying also these green technologies to buildings with hydroponic system, and also studied how plants can treat waters. And I did this for many years, like in different countries and in different climate conditions, because you know that plants react very differently. It depends on the climate. So I did research in Sahara, in arid climate, or in tropical climate in the Dominican Republic, and in Italy, so Mediterranean climate, and in New York, when I was involved of this project with the Columbia University and NASA, funded by National Science Foundation, for quantify the fundamental behavior of green roof in a urban environment. And this was back 2010, 2012. And finally, in 2018, the United Nations said that nature-based solutions are a good solution for water management and for climate change mitigation adaptation. So there was, and they become like more popular after more than 10 years I was studying that solution. So this introduction, why this is the end of the scientific introduction, because because at the same time, as an artist, I was influenced by those scientific research. And so, for example, was the first man made by plants that purify the air polluted by the man in flesh and bones. So it was the first installation of plants that I did while I was studying plants for climate change mitigation. And this was back in Manhattan. It was a show that I did in town in 2011. And actually, this was also the last anthropic figure that I did in my art. And because of that, I focused more with the installation with plants, connected with the scientific research. And so in this show, for example, back in Bologna in 2013, probably, I just did this, I hung this tree to the ceiling. And because this tree was chosen from a research from the National Center of Research as the tree that most and the other can absorb CO2 in cities in the Italian climate. And the other is a trench, say, of fern, that because I use fern because fern are the plants that are hyperaccumulator of metals, so can absorb metal pollutant from the soil. And but yeah, going back to the tree, I always say that this was the best artwork I did because while during the exhibition, just the tree blossomed, so the leaves slowly come out. And it was beautiful observing in the gallery, something that happens every year in the street. But in that contest, it was like the best piece of art to look in this performance. And from that time, I did this definition, it was 2011, that is nature is art, is the art practice that elect the physical chemical reaction that happens in nature as the artwork itself. For example, the plant's ability to treat anthropic pollutant. So those chemical reaction, physical reaction are the artwork. And since that time, the fern was part of my alphabet of symbols and was part of my shows actually. And so I did many installations with fern and sculpture and paintings, and try to make some icons that talk about those reaction and transformation. And this show was important for me because it was the first time probably that I put it together, science and art, and it was at the Museum of Science of the University of Bologna. So probably it was one of the oldest European Museum of Art and Science with all the manuscript of the scientists from the past, from biologists. And so at the time I have this showcase, and there I put it there, some article that I wrote as engineer, some paper that speak about this ability of plants of treat pollutant, and other influences like a book of Thoreau, Walden, an old version, and some drawings, and a flag. This flag was at the entrance of the museum, and this very important equation that is plants stay at the ecosystem as revolutionary at the society. So this ability of plants to regenerate the ecosystem is compared as the rules of revolutionary in the society when the society become authoritarian and there is a lack of rights and a lack of freedom. And this is, of course, is something that is a point that is a connection between the environmental research and the political research. So political ecology, I would say. And okay, this is the end of a small introduction between science, political ecology, and this definition as a nature is art. This for me is very important. Another introduction is about the shape what there is behind the shape. So those images that I do, I say that are not abstract shape, and not, but they are icons. So they're not figurative, they are not abstract, but they are symbolic. So those shapes for me are minimal representation of the transformation that was mentioned before in nature. Of course, art is also visionary, so there are sometimes visionary transformation and change of state of matter. For example, this is from cloud to rocks, or from organic to inorganic. But this research about shapes is something they want to create an alphabet, or let's say an aesthetics that goes with the contemporary research on sustainability and the struggle for climate justice. I believe that the main problem related to environment is represented very well from this engraving from the 1781 for Charles Bonnet, and that is the Scala Naturae, that is the Aristotelic idea of anthropocentrism. So the hierarchy that is influenced like our thought since ever, that put the man at the top of the pyramid, at the top of the steps, and after the animal, and after the plants, at the really end, the mineral and the inorganic matter. So this hierarchy is the one that causes all the problem related to the environment from my point of view, and the impact that the humans have on the planet. So as a provocation, because I'm very against this hierarchy, and I think we have to change the point of view from anthropocentric to ecocentric, I'm just painting the last part of the steps. So I'm considering the less considered things, that is the inorganic matter, as an icon for ecocentrism. And this is why for many years I'm just painting mostly rocks, mineral, transformation of matters or landscape and plants. And I'm not painting human beings or animal anymore. I think so we're overrated. And as a provocation, I say that they're already extinct in my work. Those shapes have different meanings in different contexts. I am multimedia artist. I really don't care about techniques. I use every techniques, from painting, sculpture, wall painting, installation, video, everything. But what is matter for me is the meaning behind those shapes. And so from installation to large installation, this was shown at the Biennale of Architecture Italian Pavilion, was a project in the landscape, and mural. Well, I will jump this, sorry. It's too long otherwise. Yeah. And this image, I think, is a good resume for talking about nature as art in the landscape, the one that was mentioned before. Because, for example, this landscape was already a piece of art for me. This incredible mountain and the woods was already beautiful. So what I did with the friends, actually, we just add the roots that there was underground, so to make visible the invisible. And this was something for underline the beauty of what there was underneath. And same, I did it many times with mountain, because I believe mountain peak. This is why I was asking yesterday to the other colleagues, they works about the mountain peak. And I did a performance on the rock slide. It's called a rock slide in the wood. And it's a performance on the rock slide. I want to underline the beauty of this rock slide. And what I say to the performer, there was dancer, climbers, that we were only extra, because the main subject of the performance, it was those giant rock. Those giant rock was the protagonist of the performance. So, and everything we did in this performance on the rock slide was something for underlying the importance and the beauty of those giant rocks that became an obelisk in a way. As said in his book, Elise Reclus, in the History of a Mountain, this was a big influence for me. He's a geographer, he's an anarchist, and he's a man of science. He's a fundamental for history of geography, for the odd geography itself. And he was always doing a reflection on the society. Even if he was talking about a mountain or a landscape, he was only doing a double meaning and thinking about the rights in the society. And he was talking about, in his book, History of the Mountain, as rocks, as an obelisk. And so this is why I'm focused on this geology, and to try to make a tribute to the geology, and try to change the natural pyramid that you said before. I did it many times to do this tribute to the geology, as this is in a mountain, and on top of the mountain in Dolomites. This is in Norway. This is Fondazione Pistoletto in Italy. Okay, this is another, give me the opportunity to the introduction and other things about related to nature's art. That this is a wall painting that was completely covered from climbers plant, and during the time, and this is also a very important part of my artwork, like how plants become part of the artwork itself, and the piece of art will made by the man, by me, will disappear, and the plants become the piece of art. And so I like this, because like the ego of the artist becomes smaller, and then the plants become the artwork. And this technique, I use it many times in performance in theater. This is an old performance in a theater in with the big trees. Those are sculpture that during the time was completely covered by climbers plant. This now, this was like, yeah, 2014 is a landmark for a new space in a garden in Bologna, and it was completely covered of climbers plant. And with this idea, I developed other installation. This is a Hydroponic Cloud. I made it in 2016, and it's a cloud made by plants in hydroponics. And the latest setup was this year. There was like it became an ecosystem, because this hydroponic cloud was connected with this natural lake, and the ecosystem itself became an artwork. So, and I did this. I did it many times with climber plants that take part of the installation until cover it almost completely. And it's interesting because the plants become sculpture itself. Okay, I don't want to. This concept, yeah, I move it to non-performance. Okay, this is a more the part related to the landscape. I don't know what time is it, because I want to speak about the climate art project. Time. Yeah, because, so this was the part related to borders, but so, and also give me the opportunity to speak a little bit more on my performance part. So 10 years ago, probably not 2015 years ago, I started to do this performance with flag, and it's related to public art, and so this times was a performance dedicated to the geographical border against the political border. So it was a parade for a cliff. They made it in South Italy, where all the migrants arrived with the boat and many, the one that doesn't die in the sea. And so with a group of persons, we did this parade dedicated to the cliff. And of course, it was something to think about the meanings of borders. And here was a provocation to say that we was in love with this geographical border, with the beauty of the interruption from soil to sea, from the earth to the sea, but we was against the political border that caused a lot of suffering. And I decided to do this performance the day of the nation, the day of the Republic, 2 of June. Another project was at the border. This was South Italy. This was the border on between Italy and Austria, and it's called One and Only. A mountain cannot be divided by nation, and it was this flag that represent the mountain, and it was at the border at the top of the mountain between the 2 trenches. So in the no man's land, we'll say there are 30 meters that you don't know if it's Italy or if it's Austria. On this mountain that was the theater of the, I would say, where it happens, the Great War. And there was 7,000 people died for reach the mountain and put a national flag. And I decided to put this flag of a mountain that is something that unify, because a mountain cannot be divided by nation. And I did the same at the border down, well, at the past, and I replaced the national flag with this black mountain, and it lasted 3 months. Italy had this black mountain as a flag for 3 months at the border, and then we did that was the installation, basically. And of course, it's a gift to the landscape, but it's also a critical on what borders did in the past and still are doing now with the immigration. Okay, I want to jump on this one. It's a project related to water, and yeah, this is how the shape became a data visualization. It's a sculpture that is also visualize the fresh water availability. So it's 5 meter sculpture that represents the different availability of fresh water in the world. So sometimes those shapes become really, this is a chart actually. Okay, I want to go to Climate project, because I did all this introduction of my work, but for explain you better what is the Climate project. So in 2015, I started this project that since the beginning was related to art, science, and the environment and activism. If before those influences was random, when I had this commission from the conference of the COP21 in 2015, the conference related to climate change of the United Nations, to do an artwork related to climate change, I decided to do something that was like in between art and science. Since the beginning. From there, it started this project that is itinerant, and it goes in different areas for underline the vulnerability of the territory related to climate change, but also it's find to try to address climate action. So how it works? Usually I build a cross-disciplinary group between scientists, people from the art world, local institution, museum, activist group, if there are, and we do a multidisciplinary research. Sometimes we do also some public data sampling. So we take our data in a citizen science perspective. For example, we do environmental monitoring, and after build artworks from those data, from scientific paper, but also from data that we collect. And artwork can be wall painting, sculpture, like public art, and performances, or I can build exhibition for go more deep in the concept, because exhibition give you the possibility to make more like deeper reflection. And I also organize a public program like a debate workshop, and all these are done. This is a tool for environmental advocacy. So there are a political output of this project every time. Okay, the first one was this one in Paris, and was a wall painting that was in a symbolic way representing the cause and the effect of climate change, and also the consequences. At the same time, the project, so if the wall painting is a pointing operation of the problem, I always try to speak about the possible solution related to nature-based solution. This is why I did that introduction. And so here we did in a collaborative way with a collective of urban gardening, a sculpture that are also a support for plants. And so it was made through a workshop. This was in wood, and with the citizen, and with the kids, we also did horticulture workshop, and there was also conference and in dissemination in the school, in elementary school actually, and at the Sorbonne University actually of philosophy aesthetics at the Sorbonne. And so different level from the academic to the kids, the dissemination of the project. After I went to Bologna, talking about air pollution, and after I went to Bari, Bitonto is in Puglia, in south of Italy. That did this wall painting related to the map, or related to the desertification. The main issue related to climate change of that area is the acceleration of the process of desertification, that almost all the area is subjected to this desertification. There was this river that disappeared in Bitonto. So this is the wall painting that they did. And here the dissemination was at that talk at the theater. And after I went to Portugal, speaking about heat waves, and because of that also wildfire. This is the paper the main paper that was influenced the work. And here I did also, I was influenced by this poem by Florabella Espanca, that is a Portuguese poet that speak about the trees that cry and die of thirst. And so I decided to make this performance dedicated to the tree that burned during the wildfire. And this was the performance in Portugal. That performance quite, well, not young, I would say, but it was interesting to work with the voice and to do this ritual for the trees that burn during the wildfire. You know, Portugal, there are every summer like it's destroyed from wildfire. And after I went to Venice. Of course, in Venice, I talk about sea level rise, because Venice is one of the most effective sites related to sea level rise and extreme wave. And now here you can see that they have more partners in the project, because I was working with the two universities, with the local institution, and with the art galleries, and this was with the National Center of Research that do research on water sea level rise. And this was for Biennale 2017. And of course, we did a lot of research about the data related to sea level rise, because there are like really, I don't know, catastrophic images related to that, like this one. But this is, we use the IPCC report, the one that I was showing at the beginning, and about sea level rise, and also the data related to I waves, to extreme waves events, that if the sea level rise is the average of sea level is higher, of course the I waves are more catastrophic for cities. And this is the paper that connect the sea level rise with temperature rise. Okay, after all this research, I did this very sketch, this sketch of data, because I have to choose what to put in my artworks. There was a wall painting, and I decided to use the average of the data, not the maximum, because only the average was already very scary. And so, okay, in this figure, I was representing at the top the I waves, and at the bottom you can see the average of the forecast about sea level rise in the future. So if the bottom part was 2017, in 2040 is there, in 2080 is there, and in 2200 is over my head, it's more than 2 meters. And this is the average. And from different study, IPCC and Ramstorff, that is a German scientist that consider more the melting of the ice compared to IPCC. So 2100 is higher for Ramstorff, because the Greenland is considered more the melting of the Greenland. And this is more the classic shape about extreme wave, the age that the scientists calculate for this study related to extreme wave. Okay, this is 100-meter long, and is the first wall painting ever authorized on the Grand Canal of Venice. It took me, it's at the train station, and it took me more than 1 year of meetings with the institution for get the authorization. And okay, this, of course, the wall painting is a pointing operation about the problem, but I want to talk about the possible solution. And what I like to address is how the plants protect Venice since ever from the sea. And there is Venice is not the beautiful city of monument museum, but it's also the lagoon. The lagoon of Venice is beautiful and was destroyed by the oil and gas pipe. And but actually the system of wetlands are the one that protect Venice since ever from the sea. And I so decided to do this big sculpture that underneath a small garden of plants from the lagoon. Again, is ready to nature-based solution. And oh yeah, this is the sculpture. And also here we have dissemination, like with students every ages, from the university to the kids. This was interesting because it was a blast on the news. Like so, the effect of this work on the news was very high, and it was interesting to me to see that it was working. It was also in the Lonely Planet of Venice now, and but it was working the advocacy or the denounce that I was doing with art, like on the media. So I want to. It's interesting also to see the effect on the media of this kind of artwork, and the interesting part was for me that for the first time the science mentioned a piece of art, because this is the Climate Kick blog that is the European organization that need to speak about dissemination of climate change. They mention a piece of art as a good combination for raise awareness on climate change. So it's interesting how science get interested by a piece of art that before it wasn't for me. Like, in my experience, I didn't have this experience. And also the Ministry of Environment of Germany, it used that image that you see before for explaining the IPCC report to the policymaker and the politician in Germany. So it was strange how art, you got out from the art world and start to talk with the other things. After that, I decided to go to Delhi, because Delhi in 2018, it became the most polluted city for air pollution in the world. So I decided to go to Delhi to speak about air pollution. And I did this wall painting related to air pollution. I want to put like the data related to air pollution on a wall, because there was the climate movement there that was super repressed, the old organization, environmental organization in the years in India. So I want to make a statement that also can help the struggle for the environment in Delhi. And so you can see the graph that I showed you at the beginning, the famous graph about greenhouse gases, but there are also the data related to the pollutant in Delhi, and also the immatriculation of the vehicle in Delhi that is the most responsible of this air pollutant. And the black that you see on the wall is is also data visualization, because I use this paint made by smog. Is an ink made by smog from a group of Indian that study at developed it at MIT, that is called air ink. And so with some square meters of this ink is related to hours of emission. And okay, this is the graph that I showed to you. But on the right part of the wall, I want all to speak about possible future. So decarbonization and mitigation of temperature, the graph that was showing at the beginning. And again, wetlands. So if on the left there was the problem, on the right side there was the future scenario, hopefully decarbonized. And also collaborate with some sign painters from Bollywood, writing in Hindi like sentence like climate justice. At the beginning and in the middle of the transition from the pollutant part and the future scenario, there is a tree again, because I believe that again plants are the one that help us in this transition. And the tree, I choose this wall because of the tree, because the tree is also part of the artwork. And here I decided to do also a parade. Actually, this time, I usually am not in my parade, I just do the direction, but that time for a security issue, I have to stay in the parade because we was blocked by the army. There was a lot of issues. We blocked the traffic in Delhi. So it was dangerous for my performance. So I decided to join the parade for guarantee. And there was a lot of kids that was super powerful voice that drive the performance through the city. This is, the Delhi version of my performance in a public space. Okay, I finished the part related to climate art project, like more international project, and I will start the last, the last 15 minutes, 15, the local project. At one point, I decided to develop more local project related to climate art project, because of course the international project was like good for the mediatic impact that they have, but I believe that local project can be long-term and stronger in terms of research and result. And so I moved back to my city, that is Rome, where I grew up, where I missed it for 14 years. And when I came back 5 years ago, I decided to work mostly on the green space, on the park, and on the river in city. So I built these networks of university center for research and the main contemporary art institution like the Maxi Museum and the Foundation of Art and the Pala Expo and the theater. Well, basically I did a big network in town from art and science and also from some association. And we did this project related to green spaces and rivers. The Flumen project, it lasts from, well, I started 5 years ago, but the Flumen project is last 3 years and talk about rivers, because I believe that rivers are important driver for sustainability in cities. So qualify like the quality of the, well, I would say regenerate rivers means also regenerate the environment in cities, the health of the city and the citizen. And so I was doing artworks and scientific research and environmental campaign on rivers in Rome. And so what we do, we analyze the water with open session with kids or with adults, different sessions. So again, in a citizen science perspective. So we teach how to take sample about the water. We use also plant as a bioindicator. And we take our data on the rivers. And we also trying to do a scientific experiment to see how the aniane that goes in the Tevere change the quality of water in the Tiber river, because and so we are taking sample before and after the aniane confluences for see the change of water quality. And we did this for 5 years, and now we are collaborating with the regional institution for water quality. We have also 20 years of historical data related to rivers. So our data are pretty sure we can build an advocacy campaign from that data. And we also do monitoring of plants on the rivers, comparing the data from the 18th century for the 1970 and from 2000 to 19 and 20, because we have data of the species that are on the river side. This is a professor of Roma Tre University. It is a head of biology. She do research related to plants in a urban environment. It's interesting to see how during the time the species change on the rivers. And this is also another monitoring. We also do soil monitoring analysis. And from that, we do also phytoremediation solution. We do field for experiment to see how plants can treat the pollutant from the soil. Actually, the plants that they use it for this experiment was used before in a show, because the public problem had also this show that was the Auditorium of Art in Rome. And there was this installation with sculpture, flags, photography, and an installation of plants. Actually, this is fern and cannabis sativa, cannabis, let's say. And because also the hemp, the cannabis have this property to treat soil and to stack metals, accumulate metal in the roots actually, and fern accumulate in the leaves. And so the same plant was used also for installation. Actually, the first action of Extinction Rebellion in Rome was at the auditorium for the opening of my show in Rome. And after that, there was like many action. Another output are also academic paper. For me, it's important to publish in a scientific magazine paper that talk also about art. So this is a journal for environmental planning, and this project, the Fluent project, was published in this artwork. So there was the experiment related to plants, and also the performance and the show in the same paper for a scientific magazine. And for us, was a goal to talk about performance and art installation in a scientific magazine related to environmental management. Okay, this is one of the last performance we did for the Flumen project. It's called Aula Verde, is a green classroom. And in a performative way, we plant trees, and trees that can treat the soil, can advantage the river, because they treat the water that goes in the river Aniane. And for me, it's a land art project, but it's also a place where people can meet. And it's a classroom where you can do environmental education, for example. And this is the project, actually, and it's made from Pioppi e Tigli, Popus alba, and okay, the trees that are good for the riparian area. And this is also a project I'm doing with the Center of Research as partners. And okay, for finishing, I did a lot of work related to rivers. So when the city asked me to do this wall painting near the Colosseum at the Metro Monti, I chose to do the confluences between the Aniane and the Tiber, because I was doing this public project and those researches in the city related to rivers. And it became the symbol of the river contract in city. So I think the artwork is not the wall painting itself, but make more sense because there are all these projects with the community in Rome involved in this river campaigning. And of course, also when the city asked me to do the New Year Eve's event with the Opera Theater, I decided to do a performance on the River Tiber. And it was a little ritual dedicated to Tiberino, because the Romans, before the Roman, the River Tiber was venerated as a god, and now it's really polluted. Okay, I think you're good for that. But now, yeah, other things in Rome related to waters. This is the River Arno in Florence. And this is another performance in Bologna related to water. Displacement is a performance related to climate change, water, and migration for the city of Bologna. I think this is enough. Thank you. And so this is Climate Art Project, from scientific research to public art, to convey consequences of climate change and to inspire for act and doing climate action. Thank you. Good. Perfect. Sorry if it was so many images, but I tried to do an overview of what I'm doing.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea and Enrico, for this wide view on your so big work and long career, I would say, your youth. I love this twofold work on this symbolic and performing works and actions, trying to awake awareness on sustainability and activism and all this related to nature, but also on politics, and also this other dimension of your work, building living sculptures, I would say. Yeah, these sculptures that let the plants grow and occupy the thing, the structure of the sculpture. And well, I don't know. I was wondering, and then the last action, painting planting trees in the gardens. And I was wondering about the concept of intervention in nature, because you also talked about plants being like the revolutionary agents in ecosystems, like revolutionary people in society. And I was wondering on the concept of intervening, So how do you reflect on this? Because sometimes it seems that you let the plants grow let's see what they make with your sculptures or your murals, yeah, and they occupy that, so you let them freely grow up, and sometimes you intervene in that. Do you reflect on this? It's really an important concept. We as human have to reflect, what do we do with nature? So at this age that is so fragile, shall we let it do itself and grow up itself, or shall we help it to do it? You know what I mean? As an artist, do you, and an engineer and scientist, do you reflect on this when you work on your projects?
Yeah, I reflect. Thank you for the question. I reflect on this a lot, actually, and more that I study plants, more that I think that less that we do as a human, and better we do. In a way, like I think we have a huge ego as a human being, and so we, even in science, there is a lot of this, like to do intervention, but at the end, what I'm doing in planting this plant is just to try to mitigate the impact of what we do, like polluting rivers and water. That's the thing. So this incredible availability of plants to treat the pollutant, for me, is so interesting, and just we just need to let the nature regenerate the environment. And of course, we have to stop to pollute. No, to the first things is to control all the emission on rivers, for example, and to stop the emission, and after to let the plants regenerate the ecosystem. And for do this, I have to say very clear that I work with a wide group of persons that are more expert than me on plants and species. And so I don't do nothing alone. I always ask confirmation if this species is the right one for those, for example, green classroom. It's all studied with person that just study plants as a environmental behavior of the plants in the ecosystem. So ecosystem is something very complex. This is, I think, the biggest fascination, the complexity of ecosystem, and also the connection, the wild connection that are in the ecosystem, that everything is connected, and everything you do influence something. So it's important to maintain these things of the complexity. And you know, with all the curiosity the scientists and artists have, I feel that you never know enough. You know, I feel that I don't know nothing yet, even if 20 years I'm studying ecosystems. But I always act as a person that don't know enough. Yeah, this is I think the main things to maintain the complexity. And it also goes to the first question, no? How to speak about an urgency, an emergency, without simplifying, maintaining the complexity. You have to do a lot of research. It's never enough. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Is wise as well, so perhaps it can help us to hold this complexity. Yeah,
there is a question in the chat.
Oh, sure.
If you want to read it.
Shall I read it?
Or him? Or
yourself?
As you like.
Wonderful work. Can you talk a little about the public response on the streets and how far reaching your work is helping people to understand the urgency of our predicament?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Acting in the public space is a big responsibility because you are doing something in front of many people. So, and also people that don't ask you to see what we are doing. So it's a big responsibility. I believe that sometimes, for example, the Venice the Venice wall painting, people from Venice know from long time, more than me, the problem of sea level rise. But the point that they just erase the problem, because it's too bad to think that your city is going to disappear in 100 years. And all the scientific papers say that Venice, it will disappear in 100 years. So it just psychologically, if you live in Venice, if you are from there, you remove the problem because it's too big to deal with it. And the point is to put these things straight on your face with this line is a shock thing. It's like it's a pointing operation of the problem. But I believe that the most important thing is to talk about what we can do. So to talk about how the plants since ever protect Venice, the importance of the lagoon, the importance of maintaining this very fragile ecosystem between plants and sea and floating things and cities. And so I believe it is now, as if before I was talking more about the problem, now I'm talking more about the possible climate action. And so this is about how I try to to connect with people. So I try to speak about solution that just scare them with the problem. And that's the thing. Is also another important part that art is never very too explicit, like as a language that is also, there's some ambiguity in the message. So it's always, the image is always open to the reflection of the public. So an open image is close in every person differently. It depends from his cultural background and his experience. So sometimes my wall painting are kind of robust with the data and formula, but sometimes are more data driven. Other times are just more something that talk about nature, and everyone have his own feelings related to that issues or their arguments. So I try to make it open to the interpretation.
Isabel wants to say something.
Hi, hello, Andrea. So thank you so much for this wonderful, really wonderful presentation. Yesterday, I mean, I would have so many questions that it would take many hours to at least a couple of them to go on. But I have one question. Yesterday, we were talking about politics. And you yourself said when we were hearing and listening and seeing Diane Berco's landscapes, that to paint a landscape was already a political act, right? And I think that there is a lot of that also explicitly said that in your work. And especially, I would like to ask you, when you work with a community, your works with communities are very important. The collective dimension of your work is very present from the very beginning, or almost all pieces or works and projects that you have been showing, either because you work with teams of scientists in research teams, or because you work in collective settings, cities, neighborhoods, houses, or that you work with schools, with kids, or that you work with media, so that the dissemination into the community is especially important. And also when you showed this scale of beings, a slide, it is very interesting because this is when you say, I decided not to paint anymore humans or animals because they are at the top, and I choose to paint rocks and plants, or to work with rocks and plants. This denial of hierarchy is already a political act. And in fact, it comes back to the artistic theory in the 16th century or the 17th century, where they were putting landscape at the bottom, at the most ineffective of all arts, because it was dealing with dead matters and not with man, which was the image of God on earth. So how you elaborate, or if you can elaborate a bit longer on these, on your idea of what the politics of your own art practice, or the politics of these landscape practice, if you want, which are so apparent, and I think it's a driving force in your work.
Yes, thank you for explaining. I think everything is politics. No? It's very difficult to talk about politics with art, because the language of art is different from the political language of propaganda, for example, or the scientific language. And because I think art language is connected to politics, but it's more open, it's more transversal in a way that leave this ambiguity, and so this is also can be a potential. The freedom that the art language has for talking about things is very important. If you think about the project that I show, Ready to Borders, and I think art is an act of truth, and I was an activist since I was really young, and this is become part of my artwork, because everything you are, it's become evident in the art piece. This is your life. So this is how slowly the art piece became more political, because at the beginning I was three different things. I was a scientist, an artist, an activist, and I didn't mix these three things. But at one point I saw that to overlap these three research or three life was very powerful, and I started to be more political when I had more public commission, because before my art was more like free, random, I don't know, expression of creativity, and but when I had like a public commission from cities and the opportunity to talk to a wider public, and I want to, at that time, I want to push the most the hardest about stronger political statement. I didn't feel the necessity to talk about this when I was in the collectives and with the activist group, because I was feeling redundant. But when I was in a more institution and more wilder mediatic situation, is there, then I was more radical. And I think it's needed to take the responsibility, if you have the opportunity to speak to a wider public about social issues and environmental issues. I believe in the contribute of, I want to contribute on the cultural debate with art. I don't want to do decoration with my art. I want to try to contribute to critical thinking. This is really clear. And this is what I say to the mayor of Rome when they commissioned the performance for the New Year Eves. I said, I will never do entertainment. This artwork is a statement for clean the rivers that and I was addressing her responsibility in taking care of the rivers in city and the green spaces. So, yeah.
That's a question, Vera.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. It was really wonderful. I have a bunch of questions. Really, I appreciate a lot how you describe your art as a farewell to kind of anthropic figure and inauguration of a kind of ecocentrism, not egocentrism, ecocentrism. And I want to ask you actually, because in your art, you're using symbols, data, figures, and how can you relate these three elements that you use in your art? And if you can see a kind of translation, if there are different levels, and like the symbol is a kind of, it's on the top of the mountain. So before you have this research with data, and then you get to the most abstract element. Yeah, so I was interested in this kind of translation in your art, and this also looking for a figure, for a scheme, for a language that maybe you can also, I don't know, justify in like looking for an arche, or so these anarchic things we were discussing yesterday. Another thing is, how can you envision your own work? So do you feel, as you said, I don't want that my art is entertainment. Are you like a kind of color, or like prophet in the desert in a way? How do you feel yourself? Because it was also related to the question that somebody made you so in internet, no? And another thing that maybe it's just a provocation about root, the idea of roots, because I saw that in your project you deal with nature, but also with migration, no? So with art, nature, landscape, and migration. And I was thinking under a philosophical point of view, how actually also the idea of mountains, the idea of roots were so interpreted in a kind of nationalistic way, no? So the idea, I don't know, I think just the German romanticism had or Fichte, so the idea that, you know, the language, as we talked yesterday about it, so the language, the identity, the Heimat, so there is a kind of connection that is also land and blood, no? So, and the root in this way is seen as a kind of metaphysical embodiment of this belonging. So a belonging that is also national belonging. And I was impressed by your idea of your statement of the mountain that cannot be divided by nation. That's true, but in another way, there is also this sentence of George Steiner, but also Flusser, that men are different from mountains or from trees, because where the trees have roots, we have legs. So we can move and we can shape another geography, that it's not the geography that corresponding to, you know, like national national or geopolitical order. So these are my questions.
Okay. Thank you. Many questions. So I try to. So the first, I try to remember. So the first one about the symbol, no, the iconography that I create. In this one, I really ask you support from you to the philosopher, because the ambition is to create an aesthetics around this fight for climate justice, and aesthetics for the research related to sustainability I don't know if many years then I'm doing these images, icons related to transformation geology, but I don't know if I'm making it. And I think every movement, if you think about every movement needs images, not flags to withstand, but in a way, images to fight for, no? So they find some aesthetics that goes with the imaginary, with the thinking. So if you think, I met the movement was fighting for the Dakota pipeline. It was interesting how they was relating in their fight all the similitude with the animal vision, like the eagle and the snake, and in the imaginary, you know, that is related to of course the local communities, now the Indian it was interesting to how to build an imaginary for the fight, how to build an imaginary. And so this is needed, and I to work also on a visual and aesthetics and symbolic way to go parallel with the scientific research and with the scientific language and with the political language. You know? I don't believe art can save us, Santiago. I don't believe art alone can save us. But if you put like the art language with scientific language, with the political action, all together, there will be a symphony, something that is impossible to not understand, to don't, you know. So it's all together. And it's to the iconography, I really want to like to share now with you this idea to find icons and not working like figurative, not working abstract, to find icons with intrinsic meanings. So, and this was the first. And the second one, I feel a prophet in the desert, I don't know. Well, of course, like, yeah, my artwork is driven by this political feeling. It's true, this ethical, and I really believe in what I'm doing, and this is what probably I'm obsessed doing work on. That is part of my work. But I think so and to connect also to the second question that was about the roots, you know? And so I will reply to both. Speaking about roots, I believe that it's important to make networks, connection, and so this is why I share knowledge with the other expert in environment or other person, and to different also to spread my work in the society to different level, from the kids to the academic, you know. And it's important to build networks. So I believe that roots more as a Don Haraway say, I don't know, in a symbiotic system. So this change of energy, information in equal part, you know, back and forward. So I see more in this rhizomatic system in a way to mutualize, for go back to anarchism. Which actually I did drawings for Kropotkin Mutualide book that was republished in Italy, and it was interspecies mutualide. It was like more like related to mutualide between different species. I think so. Is if Kropotkin was alive now, probably was thinking this way, not just mutualide between people, but mutualide between different species, and it's the only way to keep the ecosystem alive. To consider the other species. So yeah, my roots are more like in this direction, horizontal, that's like identity sometimes it's a problem. So all this work related with flags are of course a critics of identity in terms of a flag as an identitarian way, seen as identitarian things that exclude. So for example, you know, from one performance there was this performance about nature doing starting the night. You saw, I didn't mention, but you saw the picture. At the end of the performance, I decided to burn our flags at the end of the performance because it was a radical statement. In the night, this group was connected to the Orestea of Eschilo, the Rinni, the female figure that are against the society for the wildness of the nature. So this, and but I saw it as too much as a statement because we was starting for part of the city going through the center that was this theater festival. In the night we was with this black flag with the plants and everything, and at one point it seems too close as a message, so we decided to burn the flags for destroy also this identity that was too much, to let the message open in a way, to give some input, but don't want to be close with the meanings. And so I have problem with this identity in a way. Sometimes it generate monster, no?
Thank you for this. So maybe I think actually you were speaking to what I was about to ask, but I'm going to ask anyway. There's a sense in which I think of responsibility and maybe to a certain extent, as Isabel was talking about yesterday, care is a little bit of a hot potato between domains of activity and expertise. So there's a sense in which it's, if you're a scientist and there's something to be taken responsibility for, then you become an artist. And the reason to become an artist is because you have to take the issue to the public. Once it's in the public, then you're in the domain of activism. And then you're sort of making demands for justice. And you're going to, I think, the politicians for that. So like your work is so wonderful because it's a kind of cosmopolitics onto itself. And so I can clearly see that. And even in hearing you talk about, okay, but it's not enough, so we burn the flags, right? And then there's this moment of kind of burn, right? There's a kind of limit there. And so I think what I was going to ask, and also you were speaking about this in terms of the Dakota Access Pipeline. I mean, my thought was like, there's a little bit of a difference in the sense that there it's a protest of resistance because there are already in that cosmology water keepers, right? And they're doing what they're like, we're responsible here, we're the water keepers. So, or there may be fire keepers, or, there are people who have that designated responsibility. And that's why they protest, and the protest is resistance. But there's a sense in which a public commission might be like the politicians saying, well, we've got a problem here, we better hire an artist. And so art can easily become a Band-Aid and not the solution. And so for those who want to, this is what I've heard about educating people to become activists. It's, make sure you know what you're asking for and put that in your sign, and so there was the Christy Belcour's Water is Life. Mm-hmm. That was, Water is Life was an artwork that became a meme that went on social media. And it actually captured the whole kind of cosmology of the water keepers and also the point of stoppage or obstruction and resistance. And so I'm wondering a little bit what you were saying about, making a demand of the mayor of Rome, like, hey, I'm not doing this for you. I'm curious about your interaction with the people that because it seems to me you're saying, there are those who should take responsibility for this. And in a way, Isabel Stengers says this too, about this notion of the intrusion of Gaia. Like if we, the problem with where we're at is, there will be these eruptions, there will be floods, there will be fires. And I don't envy the politicians, but we need guardians, right? And so there's a call to think a little bit differently too about like, okay, who are our guardians? Who are the ones that we're being asked for? So it's a little bit of a question of who is responsible and what are you asking of them and from what position, because in a way it's a very powerful image if you have children who are asking for climate justice, but they're probably asking you to bring that justice too, right? So, and you're in engagement with them, and I'm wondering, what do you think of tangibles? Do you think of, do you bring them the chaos? Or how do you think of that engagement with those who you see, I think, as responsible for justice? Maybe a big question.
Thank you. Thank you for at the beginning clarify my cosmo and for this question. So in terms of responsibility is I've these things that is also an issue. I cannot do greenwash operation because I have also scientific position to defend. So something is, if it's not really sustainable things, and I cannot do it because so this is a big part. So when I speak, also when I teach the Academy of Arts, or I do this small seminar, I always speak with the students to do research if something is really green and sustainable. Don't follow in the trap to speak in something and working for companies that want to do greenwash, or working for politicians that want to solve the problem with the artist. I'm definitely with you on this. Every commission that we have to try to understand that better, that we can, what there is underneath, what the really meanings of what we are doing. It's a very complex, even more that is in public space. So I'm trying to do things that are not greenwash, and they are not like in the direction of helping some politician for their propaganda in terms of political party, for example. So I try to follow my research with my knowledge of this. Building a network can help me to don't make more mistakes. So this is in terms of responsibility is very important. At that time, now that environmental art is becoming very known, more and popular, to do something that is really green, as not greenwash, that is fundamental and really. And in terms of responsibility, in terms of what asking, in terms of what's the effect of this, environmental advocacy on this campaigning, I don't know. I think sometimes an artwork, even if the international project, for example, I don't have time to build a campaign there. It's just a light something that I was in Dali 2 months. What can I do in 2 months? I was there and I had contact with the Center of Research. I went to Sunita Narayan. It is an incredible Indian activist that lead a Center for Research, that is Center for the Environment, for Science and Environment. Is independent center of research, and I spoke with locals, and I was trying to find what is the issues in city, and I discovered that many group was repressed. The Sunita Narayan Center, not because it's big enough, is of international attention, but the small groups, they were all repressed. And so I try to speak and to make something that makes sense in that context. Is site-specific art and these kind of things. But after, I don't have time to build a really campaign. It's not my rules. I don't know. As an artist, I can make an artwork and try to contribute to the debate. And what I'm doing in Rome is a little bit more, because it's long term. I'm taking data since 5 years on the river. And now I have also the data from the institution that monitored the rivers. And what I'm doing there, that as an artist, I have this possibility to speak more direct probably than an institution that is monitoring rivers, for example. That there are more implication in politics, and more the freedom of speech that the artist is the artistic research is free, and we can address problem without probably implication that others have the most. So I try to use this freedom to address things. So and there's a stronger background in terms of data and experience. And this is why I think, sir, now I'm very interested in this local project that must be globally connected in a way, because otherwise nobody knows. But probably there are many local projects that are very good, and they have an impact on the territory because they are long terms. but we don't know it. So I think it's important to connect local project and to build a network of local projects. So what I'm asking with that data is clear that basically we want to go back and swim in the Tiber River as it was in the 50s, because in the past, before the 40s, in the 30, there was this racing on the Tiber from bridge to bridge, and the Romans used to swim in the river, and now it's super polluted. Probably you die if you swim there because there are, I think it's well, it's it was abandoned in a way. This is there are a lot of organic matter. I have the graph. These are the organic matters, nitrates, and about just sludge pollution that come from the civil from the city, from the houses, and there are also metals. There are arsenic and mercury. That it comes from geological pollution that comes from north of Lazio and is in the rocks geologically, and it's a problem. But for example, these fern are very good in concentrate arsenic, so it's interesting for as experiment. And after, this it's impossible to go, even though you can take different disease related to the rocks. So it's very polluted, but it's possible to purify before to stop the emission. So on the rivers, and after to use plants for treat the waters and the different methods for. And what I'm asking is to start from the river to treat the water, but not also see the river as a meeting point, a place where you go, you can socialize. So now the river in Rome is forget. Well, you don't go to the river. There is this cement high burden. You don't go down. It's impossible. So the people doesn't experience the river anymore. I think so. It would be beautiful to also for socialize, for meeting person, and also for sustainable I would say for moving, for like bike line. It's a driver for sustainability for cities, and many cities are on river because the needs of water. They build Rome there because there was the river, because they need water, and many cities are rivers or on seaside. So it's a good starting point for the urban sustainability, I believe. And so I think there is more clear what I'm asking to the city. And after, it's not only me, it's an actor. There are the social movement, but an artist with our language, that the language of art can contribute to the debate. I don't think alone we can do something, but it's a contribution in another form of contribution.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions, or perhaps in the chat? No. Well, then last one, and we'll have a break then. Yeah.
Working? Okay. No other question. Like, you talk about politics, and a lot of, everything is politics, and in the politics of it's very, like, from the impression I get, it's very democratic and very close to the people, to the local people you're working with. But I was wondering also, do you also kind of point fingers, or do you pick sides, or do you denounce things as well? Like, I see a lot of positive energy in your work, but I don't see a lot of finger pointing. Basically, I don't know what your stance is on that. I don't know if it's clear.
That you don't see.
Are you blaming anyone, or are you like? I think it's easier to approach things a bit more harmonically, where everybody works together, and it's, I think, more difficult to instead point fingers or create kind of antagonisms, or that there are some forces kind of that are destroying the world and some that are regenerating it. and to focus more on on the regenerative force is very good, but I feel it's easier than it is to point out the destructive forces. But I came in a bit late as well, so I don't know if I missed anything.
Oh, okay. Okay, probably you don't see that, like the first slide there was the end of capitalism or end of the world. This was kind of a very explicit in a way. You know, there are different with my art, of course, you cannot. I think the language of art is not straightforward. You know, as a citizen, I'm also an activist. I can go as a citizen to demonstration. I go since I was super young and still going. Even now, just living the artwork itself. But if you see, maybe it's not straightforward, but if you was saying all the presentation, probably you will understand that there is a denounce like quite clear in a way. And also choosing to what commission doing or what not is very political. Because, for example, talking about greenwash, in these years, I was contacted from many oil and gas companies for do advertisement. And they proposed me a lot of money, and I decided to don't do it. And this is very political, because I need money, of course. And so I don't say that, but of course now the one that they're polluting the most, they're trying to invest in greenwash the most. So they're paying for change their dress and their public image. And so an artist that do an advertisement for pollutant, a company that is responsible for pollutant the most, as the oil company, have a big responsibility on contributing, you know, trying to not showing what they are doing. So this is in the year, so it happens many times now, but I'm not asking anymore. But this is something really political. And I'm not afraid like to talk against who is the pollutant. I did it as a scientist for many years, and I can do that as an artist. And even in terms of ethics and responsibility, if you are an engineer and you are good in mechanical, in drillings, for example, and you decide to make water wells and not oil wells, it's a political decision. It's very political what you do with your work, and this is important, and this is why we're doing this conference, I guess, because we need a lot to like contribution in terms of ethics and politics, and not only techniques. What to do is very difficult sometimes, but it's important so to have this conversation also for see where we are in the society, and not like lonely in the desert or in our disciplines, to see the effect of a technical decision in the society, or the effect of a political statement in the society. Yes, it's important. Thanks.
We can keep on talking with a coffee.
Yeah.
So we'll have a short break of 15 minutes and for a coffee. But before of this, I would thank again Andrea CONTE for his generosity and.
So understanding our climate emergency through art and aesthetics. So I have my role today is not really to summarize what we've been saying this past days, because I don't believe in summaries. There's no need to do a summary, I think. But it's much more interesting, I think, to sort of find a way to, or perhaps a philosophy, or perhaps a theoretical framework within which perhaps we can move on. And by moving on, I mean not that we've been doing something wrong, but rather than, I think that it's very important to interpret, and I think this is something with Isabel we were very careful about doing, to interpret a conference. I think all conferences are really starting points. It's not the end, it's the beginning. So the beginning starts after a conference. After a conference, we all leave like after watching a good movie or Curb Your Enthusiasm or whatever, you move and you move on, change in some way. You acquired something. So I think a conference is really about what comes after a conference, not really so much an end. And in order not to interpret this conference, which I think it's a very important conference that I think everything we talked about has a lot to do with the future, but it has also a lot to do with a different sort of future. And this is what my intervention would be about. I am now writing a book called A Philosophy of Warnings, which is the subtitle of my intervention today, which will come out next year. And this idea of warnings, okay, not warming, climate warming, but warnings, okay? It's a sort of way I have to summarize a little bit, not only my aesthetic theory that I expose in my last books about the emergency, and I'm going to talk about what I understand by an emergency. But the idea here is to try to, on the one hand, to try to respond why I think that the greatest, like Andrea has kindly quoted me, the greatest emergency is the absence of emergency, but also that in order to understand what an emergency is, today we need not a new philosophy, because nothing new happens in philosophy. Anyone that sells you a new philosophy is a liar. There's no new problems of philosophy. There is just one problem about being, and from there we move on. But so the basic idea, I think, that is not so much to propose a new philosophy, as much as to understand how philosophy can in some way respond to a condition in which we find ourselves. So what is the condition in which we find ourselves today? And I think that one of the ways to understand the condition in which we find ourselves today is to try to, first of all, overcome the way Giorgio Agamben has been trying to explain this past, not months, because I don't want to talk about the last year of Giorgio, but the last 20 years of Giorgio. In other words, I do not think we are living in, or democracy can be defined as a sort of state of exception. No, I don't think that. Maybe had worked with right after the 2011, after the 2001, all the wars that came afterwards, and Bush declaring the state of emergency and managing to change democracy and implying and doing all that sort of tricks. I think today we find ourselves in a very different situation, okay, which can be very well, I think, summarized by people like Donald Trump, or also Bolsonaro, or also some other right-wing populists in the planet, and it has to do with the emergency. In other words, that it is interesting to notice that the state of exception has not been declared in the United States, for example, during all these past 2 years of the pandemic. We find ourselves today in a condition where we are living not in a state of exception, but in a state of absence of exception, absence of emergency. This is why I insist so much in this idea that the greatest emergency today is the absence of emergency. The greatest emergency today is the fact that there are emergencies, okay, that we do not take into consideration, or do we not take into consideration enough, perhaps. For example, if we look at what this pandemic is now, and this has been an emergency, a state of emergency, a state of exception for the past year and a half. Wonderful. But 10 years ago, it was an absent emergency. It was the greatest emergency, because we all knew, at least us, we are all educated people, so we knew that the possibilities of a pandemic were very high. I mean, no one at the World Health Organization was surprised. They were all waiting for the clock to start. So it is not something new. Now, if a pandemic was not something new, imagine something like air pollution, much more dangerous than this pandemic, okay, which is still going on now. And that's also an absence of emergency. We're not taking that into consideration. So the fact that we're living, as I think, in a condition, or at least I'm not an artist, unfortunately, I will have a much happier life probably. But as a philosopher, our interest, or our goal, is to sort of try to understand in some way what our condition, or our reality, or how we can best interpret our situation today. So my goal today is in some way to try to explain what an emergency is, and also to find this theoretical framework, this philosophy of warnings that I came up with, which, again, I repeat, is not something new, to the point that I think that I think a good way to define philosophy is as a warning. Philosophy is a warning, has always been a warning. And even the work of art of Andrea and Diane yesterday, I think they can also be interpreted as warnings. Wonderful, they're warnings, the things that are already happening, but still they're warnings. And the problem here is, what is a warning? And why are warnings, why don't we listen to warnings? How is that possible? Warnings are not predictions, right? Prediction is, I will walk now and have a coffee in the bar downstairs. A warning is, well, I might go have the coffee and maybe I don't like it. I don't know what would happen, right? So there is a difference, and this difference, you can find it in what I was mentioning at the beginning about the future. And this is what I would like this conference to be interpreted as. So predictions have more to do with the future. Warnings have much more to do with l'avenir, what will come, something that will happen, that might happen, but the difference between the two is that while prediction, you sort of have to, you have to accept it, there's nothing you can do. Warnings, on the other hand, something you have to be ready to listen to interpret, to wait for the moment, for the event, in Heidegger's term, or even Barriot, who copied Heidegger, of course, to open up, to start in some way. So this is the idea. The idea is a philosophy of warning, and at this point also an aesthetics of warning and ethics of warning, which we can find in so many authors throughout the history of philosophy. It's really about being able to listen and to interpret certain signs which come from the future. So I had a PowerPoint, but because of my Heideggerian, infection or something, it doesn't work. So the idea here, I had, for example, several indications of what other philosophers have been referring to as warnings. For example, if we read here Michel Foucault's statement that our society is not one of spectacle, but of civilians. Okay, this is back in the 70s. It's not a spectacle, but it's a society of civilians. Foucault was warning us of something here. Right? This was a warning of something that is coming. Okay, or even Simone de Beauvoir, even before Michel Foucault, one is not born, but rather one becomes a woman. Okay, so this is also a warning of what you have to do in order to become or to be a woman. Or even the already quoted Donna Haraway, which this is something she probably copied from Heidegger. Technology is not neutral. Wonderful. Technology is not neutral, but this is a warning for what we should expect and how we should in some way accept what's coming to us. So the reason why with Isabel, I think we insisted so much in the word understanding, Verstehen auf Deutsch, is because of a definition of Gadamere gives to understanding. Gadamere, if some of you might know, probably already know, wrote a very big book called Wahrheit und Methode, in which he basically conceptualized hermeneutics philosophy in a very interesting way. And one of the first things Gadamere does is he tries to make sure that we stop in some way believing or submitting ourselves to methods. Methods are useless. Methodology is something that the only interesting thing about methodology is the one that you do every time you start to work. In other words, it's a process. It's something that takes place while you do it, rather than something that beforehand you decide. Not even a good doctor knows how to, or a surgeon knows how to do the surgery without being in the surgery. It is a process that takes place through his work, right? And this is not something very different from the artist. One of Italy's most important philosophers last century, Luigi Parison, he used to say that l'arte è la forma formante. So you have to form, while you're forming the work of art, you're also actually creating it. So method here is something that it's very, very difficult to even to define. But actually it is not, because most of our scientific disciplines and most of our disciplines, also in these halls here, are based on methods, right? On economists base. Unfortunately, most economists base the economic theories on certain methods. And the fact that we still have several economic crises on different levels is an indication that, well, science, economics, just like so many other disciplines, is not a scientific enterprise. On the contrary, even Marx pointed out that it's not a scientific, it's not a positivistic science. Otherwise, we will just call Thomas Piketty and solve any economic or Stiglitz or some of these other guys. So understanding, I have here the quote that I wanted to put up, but I'll read it slowly. So of Gadamere, how Gadamere defines understanding. So understanding is not understanding better. Understanding is never understanding better, either in the sense of superior knowledge of the subjects because of clear ideas, or in the sense of fundamental superiority of conscious over unconscious production. It is enough to say that we understand in a different way if we understand at all. In other words, you understand only when you understand differently, not when you understand the same way. If you all understand that I have a watch in my hand, okay, which you all understand that and probably also see the watch in my hand, well, this is you're all correct, probably. You all understood what you probably most of all seen that this watch in my hand and can probably make a statement, right? Santiago has a watch in his hand. The problem is that this understanding, is this what knowledge actually means? It's just this, it's because it's very poor from a theoretical point of view. This is why one of my jihad against in philosophy is against new realism. All this new philosophy and it's called new, so it's a very sort of a problem. But new realism, or the problem of realism, is one of those classical philosophical problems that every 300 years come back and hunt someone who forgot to read some books, probably. And the fact is that the fact that we have returned now to realism is the reason why I think we do not understand, we do not listen, or we not take care of the warnings we have. In other words, even from a political point of view, if you think how politics is done today, a politician today has serious problems to make a budget, for example, thinking of pandemics. In other words, thinking of the next 50 years, what might happen. It's very difficult to do that from a political point of view today. Perhaps it has always been, but the point is that today we do not have the time, right? We cannot see l'avenir. We cannot do a politics of l'avenir, which is something that Derrida in some places talks about a little bit. But the problem is here, how do we do a politics de l'avenir? In other words, a politics that is waiting for the event to happen, okay? And not in a catastrophic way. It might be also very good events. It doesn't matter. The point is that this big sort of movement, I don't think it's really that big as it looks like, because I don't think it's so big. But the 5-6 philosophers who deal with this new realism and insist on that we have to return to some way to realism, and we have to overcome postmodernism, hermeneutics, even some feminology, and not to mention deconstructionism, of course. What is interesting for me about them, it is because Amanda also, her works also has something to do with trying to understand what they do. But my interest is more, her is more historical. I think mine is more political, in the sense that I think that new realism today, and by new realism, I mean this philosopher Guyer Hamann, Gabriel Marcus, Maurizio Ferraris, and some other guys. They think that, well, we have to overcome postmodernism, because postmodernism is also the reason why now we had Trump, Berlusconi, fake news, post-truth. It's because of them, because of their deconstruction of reality. Unfortunately, they haven't read carefully the books, because even one of the first, or perhaps the most important postmodernists, which is François Lyotard, he never wrote in La Condition Postmoderne that truth doesn't exist, or no, that's not the issue. The issue is if you only believe in truth, if you only believe in reality. In other words, probably at the end of this talk, but probably not, because I'm already asking the question that I am expecting from the public. I often get asked, you are a nihilist, you don't believe in facts, and probably you don't believe either in climate change or in some genocide now going on in Palestine. Well, or some other genocide. And no, on the contrary, I believe in facts, and I believe in all those genocides. The only thing is that in order to make sure that some of these genocides stay alive, okay, for example, the Kurds genocide, or the genocide in the Hebrew people in Germany, in order to make sure that this stays alive, in other words, that we do not forget, we need new interpretations, we need new histories, we need to maintain in some way, help in some way, facts or historical events. So the idea of interpretation and the idea of not believing in one single parameter through which we can, oh, we now have studied this fact and we can just forget about it. No, that's not how it works. In order to keep it alive, you have to continue to work on it. This is why Gadamere insisted that a classic, Shakespeare, Red Hot Chili Peppers, or whatever, a classic is a classic because of the effects it has, not because of the origin. So it is the effects that if you continue to listen to, in this case, Red Hot Chili Peppers, or if you continue to listen to read Shakespeare, if we continue to read Shakespeare because of the effects it has, not because of the origin. So it's not very different from the notion of Jesus Christ. We still worship him, not so much of, are we going to stop working? I have to drink some water. Are we going to stop worshiping Jesus Christ if they find him tomorrow somewhere in Palestine under a rock? What changes if that objectivity comes out? Nothing changes. It's the history that makes it real in some way. So don't sue me, because I heard in the United States, a friend of mine almost got sued because he had a drink without the mask, and the students sued him. So don't sue me. So understanding, let me go back a little bit to the problem of understanding. So we insisted with Isabel, we have to put here the title of this conference has to be about understanding. This conference is about understanding. And it's most of all, it's about trying to find not necessarily a new way of understanding, but trying to make sure that in particular, who has to understand here are the scientific disciplines, are those who still believe in methods, right? It is those who still believe in methods that have to in some way understand that understanding is a much broader enterprise, something that includes many more things than what we think. Because if we find ourselves in this global emergency, this climate emergency today, it is certainly not because of Andrea and Diane. It's not because of a few artists who have been doing two postmodern philosophers. No, it's because of science. Now, I'm not saying that science literally created the coronavirus. I'm not saying that. We don't even need to say that. The question is that we have created a condition where there are no emergencies, as I believe, because we have created a condition which is so well organized, right? One of the big problems we have today, like Heidegger will say, is that it's not when something doesn't function, it's when everything functions, right? So this is a society where everything functions very, very well in some way, right? Everything is very framed, okay? It is almost impossible to overcome those frames, okay? You have to become an artist to live in a different frame. So we are so framed within this condition of absence of emergencies that we believe that, for example, a complex problem as climate change can be solved through science. A complex issue like climate change cannot be solved by science alone, at least. And of course, I am a radical continental philosophy, so I go all the way and say why only art can save us. Now, I never wrote in the book that art can save us. And if you look at the title of the book, it's a question, why only art can save us? So I'm much more interested in the questions we have rather than in the solutions we have. And the questions we have will emerge only if we have a broader understanding of what understanding means, okay? So back to my idea of warnings. I mentioned that this idea of warnings it's something that is very philosophical, and that I think that it is possible, and this is something I am going to risk now in this, I'm risking already in my book, is trying to reinterpret the whole history of philosophy as a warning. So philosophy is really a warning. And I will go as far as to say that also perhaps Diane and Andrea's works of art are a warning. They're a warning of, you're not listening, you're not seeing, you're not, right? And actually, I think in one of Diane's slides yesterday, you can see seeing the climate change. So that's already an indication that this is a question of letting us listen to. Now, Heidegger, for me and for much more important philosophers than myself, like Jean-Paul Sartre or so many others, okay? He wrote in Einführung in the Metaphysique that this word being, this word sein, served as a warning to us. Okay, and for Heidegger to say something like this, that the word being serves as a warning, it's a way of Heidegger of saying, well, being for Heidegger is another word for truth. Okay, and he actually in the paragraph 44 of Being and Time, he actually shows how both really have the same origin. So the idea that being should be interpreted as a warning for us, it's what I think that we have to be dealing with here. In other words, we have to Heidegger and Simone de Beauvoir and Michel Foucault and Donna Haraway in their quote, they were inviting us to think beyond traditional paradigms of knowledge and nature, but also of warning us, okay, they were also warning us of what might happen if we don't listen, if we do not interpret this, what they're warning. So, so I mean, and then, okay. So before I mention, predictions have to do with the future, with futurology. Warnings instead have to do with l'avenir, in other words, with hermeneutics philosophy, with the philosophy that has been more or less initiated by Heidegger and then Gadamere, and of course it goes all the way back to Aristotle, De Interpretazione, Luther, etc., including someone like Freud, who wrote a small book called Of Interpretation. So interpretation is really a very important word, okay, and I think one can also push it to the point that, well, in order to understand, we have to understand differently. Well, then we are very close to interpreting, right? True interpretation, good interpretation is where when we intervene into a text, like if you see the history of hermeneutics of biblical texts and juridical texts, it's when you interpret the text that you make it live, that you make it function in some way, which of course is something that judges are doing right now in whatever thing they have to work on. So the idea that we have to interpret in order for truth to emerge, which is something that Heidegger will insist upon, it's important here because if avenir, if what will come has to do with hermeneutics, then what is our relationship with the past then? How can we in some way change? Because in other words, to create the conditions to listen to what we call avenir, in other words, a different future, what we are accustomed to believe that will happen, we have to reinterpret the past. We have to find ourselves in a sort of a new situation, a new condition. Now, a philosopher you all big fans of, Slavoj Žižek. You probably saw some video last night or something. Slavoj, who's a good friend of mine, he wrote recently that in order to change the future, we should first change our past, reinterpret it in such a way that opens up towards a different future from the one implied by the predominant vision of the past. Okay. Now, what is Žižek telling us here? Well, first of all, that he's clearly a hermeneutic philosopher, and he is, because if you know, his first book was on hermeneutics and Heidegger, which was not translated into English. So the idea here is also to understand that, well, what I take from Žižek, from what he's saying here, which all of this you can, if you're interested in these issues of Žižek on the problem of the future and how to reinterpret and how to change the future in some way, you can read, and I say the conclusion in his book, The Year of Dreaming Dangerously. So having said this, warnings, I believe, are sustained, okay? They're sustained by signs that request our involvement for a different future. So interpretation is really what allows us to see a different future, and also, in other words, to listen to a different future, to different warnings. Now, the problem here, and this is the only thing you have to write down, the rest is not important. It's a joke, it's a joke. So the problem here, but this is an important point, I think. The problem here is not whether we accept, the involvement, okay, that a warning request from us. That's not really the big problem. Much more important is whether we are willing to accept it at all. Are we willing to accept what the warning is really telling us? Because if I mention that, well, the greatest warning we have now, just like Owen Jones, a very smart journalist in The Guardian, as soon as the pandemic began 2 years ago, he had a title of one of his op-eds. It would be nice. It was something like, it would be great if we will treat climate change like we treat the pandemic now, because of course we don't, right? So are we going to accept this situation now? Accepting warnings, or accepting what warnings actually indicate, requires a lot of, like I think I made it very clear by now, a lot of hermeneutics. And by hermeneutics, if we look at the religious origins of hermeneutic, theological origins of hermeneutic, demands also faith. In other words, warnings are not something that, it's clear that I will go walking all the way there, and that's a prediction. But whether I will have a good time in walking there or not, that's a warning. It's something weak in some way, right? A warning is weak. It is not strong, right? It requires a lot of your effort in order to make it work, right? Even if a warning comes from the World Health Organization, okay? And if you look at these organizations, which are sustained by a great amount of scientists and politicians, and they're very serious institutions, contrary to what Trump believed since he stopped financing some of them. This organization, the whole time they're warning us. The only thing they do is warning us. They warn us of, of big problems that are coming towards us. So the problem is not whether we accept the involvement that a warning requests from us, but also whether we are willing to confront them at all. Our inability to accept this involvement was particularly evident with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the pandemic, which is rooted, of course, in our industrial and economic system, it spread, it has begun, it is responsible. Who is responsible for this are all those who did not listen to its warning years ago. Okay, this is very simple. It sounds too simple to be true almost, but it is, because I wouldn't go as far now as to say that, for example, Condoleezza Rice has this great speech. Remember Condoleezza Rice? Condoleezza Rice has this great speech before the Senate. I think it was 1 year before 9/11, and she was warning. Apparently, there were a lot of threats of planes that could go into big buildings throughout the United States. So she was in some way warning us of something that could. I don't want to point out that it's not that any warning works, because maybe she did that on purpose, or maybe not. I don't know. The point is that there are warnings that involve us. These are the warnings that I'm mostly interested in. The warnings that condition us in some way. When the World Health Organization has been predicting a pandemic like the one we have now, it involves us. It involves your existence. So in some way, you cannot ignore it. It would be natural not to ignore it. Now, why do we ignore this warning? And this is where I finally hit hard new realism and all that stuff. I believe that one of the biggest problems we have now, and I think Judith Butler made this point very clear, and I'm going to quote her. She affirms that, she recently said this, I think it was last year, we are living in anti-intellectual times. And this is evident all across the political spectrum. The quickness, the quickness of social media allows for forms of argumentation that do not allow a thoughtful, free debate. In other words, we have now returned to, in some way, not only to realism, like I mentioned before, and we saw this in some intellectuals and also some politicians, right? Because in some way, Trump and Bolsonaro are also very realist, very realist. They impose their truth in some way. There is no coronavirus, there is no emergency, there is nothing emerged in some way. So in some way, we have not only returned to realism because social media in some way has done what? It's something very close to realism, because social media, it's a sort of way of telling us, or in the internet in general, that we do not need filters anymore. We do not really need, not even scientists, to explain us what, that the vaccine actually works. We don't need that anymore. That filter has lost what? Has lost what Amanda calls realism without authority. In other words, there's a problem here that realism now doesn't really have any authority. Today, the filter that, for example, newspapers offered us have lost a lot of credibility, but not because they were not right or wrong, but on the contrary, because we have ceased to believe in that filter that in some way sustains facts. At the beginning, I mentioned, well, in order to sustain facts, we need a community of scientists, a community of historians, a community of sociologists, a community of that sustain facts. Otherwise, facts alone, and now I'm quoting Bruno Latour, so I'm actually sustaining my argument with some serious philosopher. Bruno Latour insisted in his last book, facts alone are useless. You need to sustain them, right? And if you don't sustain them through a community of interpreters, well, maybe the strongest voice or the loudest voice, like Trump, might impose on you. And if you go and look today in the map of the United States, the amount of people who got vaccinated, in each state, you will see the same percentage of the people who voted for Trump. Okay, it's amazing. So there is a relation there, a correlation there, which is very important. So, so the problem here again is that we have returned to believe, and we are believing in realism as something that we have to accept. Right? It's something that we have to return to and accept. Now, this has to do, I think, with political issues. I think this is a symptom of a big return to order, okay, that has been going on since 9/11 to now, because 9/11, 2008, 2009 financial crisis, and the pandemic today has not changed anything. Okay, I don't think there is any change at all. The only change there is, if we want to talk about some sort of change, it's an intensification of the measures of financial, economic, political restraint that were already in motion before. So there isn't a really big change. There is an intensification, a major intensification of this realism. So with this, so contemporary indifference towards warnings, okay, according to Santiago, is rooted in the ongoing global return to order and realism in the 21st century. This return is not only political, Trump, Bolsonaro, etc., as demonstrated by Trump, Bolsonaro, and etc., but also cultural, as shown by the return to order, by return to realism and order by some intellectuals, European intellectuals. The fact that Marcus Gabriel, who's a good friend of mine, but he has one of his last books is about how to impose universal values on the rest of the world, is a clear indication of this, that you start to believe in realism, you're going to end up probably like Bauman used to say, in Auschwitz. Okay. If you still believe so much in rationality, you will end up in Auschwitz. This is Bauman, not Santiago, so don't sue me. So the idea here that within this transparent realism, in a way, this is what it is, warnings are cast off as unfunded, contingent, and also subjective, very, it's your interpretation, it's your warning. Even though philosophers and historians of science, such as Bruno Latour and Naomi Oreskes, continue to remind us that no attested knowledge can stand on its own, okay? Because only the social character of scientific knowledge makes it trustworthy. In other words, the only reason to believe in, for example, in the issues of the vaccines now, is that you have to have some sort of faith in them. It just doesn't work without the faith. It doesn't work without some sort of interpretation from your own, from you. So how do I sort of bring all this back together? How do I bring all this back together to art and to the idea that this conference is all about, understanding climate change through art and aesthetics? Well, the idea here is that I think that it is important to think in terms of intensity. Yesterday, Isabel opened up our conference pointing out how important it is, the idea that there's a difference between, scientific pictures, like some of the ones Andrea showed us before, and the work, the way he translates that into art. There's a difference of intensity there that is vital. So what is how do we in some way, how do I not sell, because I don't sell this philosophy, but how can I in some way convince you that I have a good argument in favor of this philosophy of warning, or we can even imagine an art of warnings in some way. The central argument in favor of a philosophy of warning is not that it warns come to pass. In other words, that I warn you of something and it actually happens. That's not so important, but rather the pressure, okay, the exercise against those emergencies that are absent, okay, and most of all those emergencies that are in some way covered by the global return to order we have now. This global return to order, of course, you have to think of this in terms of Amazon that goes on to space, and there's no discussion of the amount of the way he ruined the atmosphere through his little, I don't know what we want to call it, hobby or something. So the pressure, okay, the pressure of warnings, okay, the pressure. I'm interested in the pressure of warning. I'm not interested in whether a warning will take place, but I am interested in the pressure, because as long as when the World Health Organization tells us, well, there's a warning of a new pandemic, and there are so many other warnings, they're really putting a pressure on us for some change, right? Some change that is a sort of way of being careful, sort of way of having faith in the future. So this pressure demands that our environmental, political, and technological priorities have to be reconsidered, right? Revealing the alarming signs of climate crisis, democratic backsliding, and the commodification of our life by surveillance capitalism. These warnings are also why we should oppose any demand, and this is also very important. I think this is also part of what we're doing in this conference. These warnings are also why we should oppose any demand to return to normality. Right? There's a lot of discussion now of let's return to the open concert of Red Hot Chili Peppers, which I have tickets for June, but that's a different. I will put my mask on. So this warnings is why we should oppose any return to normality after an emergency, which signals primarily a desire to ignore. Okay, when we do that, when we think about returning to normality, we're also in some way indicating a desire to ignore what caused the emergency in the first place. A philosophy of warning seeks to alter, and interrupt the reality we become accustomed to through stances that are engaged, interested, and respondent to warning. But in order to do this, it is necessary to select those signs, in other words, those warnings, who are not only manifest, but also part of the warning they're trying to disclose. What does this mean? This means that, and yesterday, this is the point I was thinking about yesterday when Diane mentioned the danger that someone in the public pointed out. Oh, your paintings are also, they reveal some danger there, right? There's some danger that she experienced, and that, but they feel the danger there. So the idea here is that if, as I think, following a lot of research I've been done, the greatest emergency is the absence of emergency. Well, that really requires that we have to come close to the greatest emergency. We have to come close to those, in some way, warnings, okay, that we do not want to take into consideration. This is dangerous. Okay, this is dangerous. It's dangerous not in the sense that the muscles will come, but it is dangerous from a broader philosophical point of view. In other words, for not submitting in some way to our cultural predicament today. In other words, when Andrea today he showed his work and his involvement with the city and his interventions in public spaces, and I think the message was I think it most of the time it's very clear. He's really requesting an involvement there, okay, an involvement which it touches you. It doesn't really inform you as much as it touches you, right? It has more to do with your emotions rather than anything else. This is why, this is, I think, the only way to explain, unless tomorrow we find out something new, but why do people listen more to Greta Thunberg than to Hansen or some Naomi Klein or some other big investigative journalists or scientists. Why? I don't think she has behind her a big manager that is making a lot of money. It doesn't look like it. It has to do more because, well, she managed to convey an emotion in some way, an emotion that perhaps we have also forgotten that we had. So this is why, to quote Isabel yesterday, the difference, for example, between Burko's painting and Andrea's installation and the latest scientific research on global warming is not one of kind, but rather of degree, intensity, and depth, as Isabel said yesterday. Scientific findings by respected scientists can be truthful, okay? They can be truthful, but rarely as powerful as a painting by Burko or an installation by Andrea CONTE and other artists, of course. So the idea for me, what is interesting for me here is to imagine that in some way, this conference and Andrea and Diane's work, and of course also Amanda's talk yesterday, if we have to find its essence in some way, its essence can be found in this idea of warnings. In this idea, and by the way, this morning, Libera almost ruined my talk because she mentioned to Andrea that, oh, this has to do with a prophet. You're like a prophet trying to tell people what will take place. And I obviously totally agree with you. So as an ontological interpretation of those signs from the future that we constantly ignore, the philosophy of warning will not prevent future emergencies, okay? I'm not interested in preventing future emergencies, but will resist the continuing absences of emergency by rescuing us, okay? By rescuing us into the emergencies. Okay? Normally we hear the word rescue that, oh, I'm going to rescue you from an emergency. No. The issue here is to rescue you into emergency, because the closer I am pushing you into an emergency, there will be more danger there also, but I am rescuing you there, okay? It is only where there is danger where you find the saving power, Hölderlin will say, okay? It is in some way in that relationship. So to finish, I have 5 minutes, but I will finish soon. I don't have so much power like Andrea to keep on going. 45 minutes and it's over for me. No, but I'm happy to have a discussion afterwards. So to sort of sum up, I think everything I said, which I think I said many things and not very clearly, but so why is the greatest emergency the absence of emergency? Well, I think the greatest emergency is the absence of emergency because the absence of emergency are really warnings that we do not listen to. A philosophy of warning, an aesthetics of warning, an ethics of warnings, an art of warnings, okay? It's really what we need today. In other words, this is, I can imagine already someone already asking me, well, what goes on with, because a warning is something that might take place, will happen, but we do have certain emergencies right now taking place. So what is the relationship with the warnings and with the emergencies we have now? Well, unfortunately, this is where I think one has to take, has to be a little bit careful, because in some way, the emergencies we have now are warnings we miss. Right? The emergencies we have now, and also some of the emergencies we have now, the greater an emergency we have now, well, it could have been a much smaller emergency we have warned ourselves, right? The problem here is that the belief we have today in science, it's part of the problem, I think. Part of our big problem we have today is we have an exaggerated belief in science. We have an exaggerated belief in what science can actually achieve, okay? And some of you might think, well, what is he saying? The vaccine is saving us now. Of course, the vaccine is saving us, but it wasn't so simple to convince everybody to get vaccinated, and it still isn't, by the way. And we're probably going to get a third shot, probably, I hear. So it is my issue here is that in relation to science, which I think this is, because I have a feeling that yesterday there was we were a little bit too nice towards science. We were a little bit too, we sort of forget the big picture, the amount of money they are making through vaccines. how they condition and how in some way they discard the humanities as much as possible. There's a little bit of too much faith in science. And I do believe that Heidegger is right when he says that science does not think. Okay? Heidegger in Wahrheit und Methode, no, I'm sorry, in Was heißt Denken, what is called thinking, Heidegger insists on this idea that, well, science does not think. Science calculates. It calculates very well. As long as it's calculated within a certain paradigm, it calculates, it works perfectly and fine. But it doesn't think. Thinking is something that's much broader, right? This is why one of the big crises we have today, I think, one of the greatest emergencies we have today, is this idea that we have all become specialists. You know, everyone is a specialist. Even in philosophy, there are specialists, right? Precisely in philosophy, there shouldn't be any specialists. Of course, you might be a specialist on Kierkegaard, and that's fine, but that should help you to see a broader amount of problem, right? So the problem we have today is this amount of specialists we have here. What do they don't see anymore? Economists, politicians, and scientists. Well, they don't see the big picture, the big warning of what is coming to you, right? You cannot solve, this is a problem we have today. Some of us have, I have, maybe not you, but you know, it's very difficult to have a doctor, a medical doctor, that managed to see your whole body, like my parents used to have, or you know, that could, you know, that can see the whole body, and they don't need to, you know, send you to 20 different experts that nobody will see. That the big problem with probably that you, I don't know, you don't have enough sex, whatever it is. I don't want to get into an explanation, but this is the idea. Okay, so the idea that we are missing in some way this global view, this global picture, which, by the way, is something that Zizek, Vattimo, and so many other philosophers are requesting in some way philosophers to return to. Okay, but I don't think that this is a request only for philosophers. I think this should be a request also for economists, should be a request also for artists, should be a request for everyone in some way. The fact that, and with this I want to finish because I don't have much coffee in me. Why did Thomas Piketty, famous economist, right? Why has his works, his books in some way function? Because this book is huge. Both of the books he published so far, and when they came out in France, before they first came in French, they didn't have so much success, right? But as soon as it was translated into English, it's big success, right? It's a little bit like Derrida says, you have to go to the United States to have some sort of legitimation. Now, why do I bring Thomas Piketty at this point? And I end my talk with Thomas Piketty, which I think is a good idea. It's because, well, he explains the problems we have now through history. He has an approach to world economics, which is a very broad historical approach to world economics. His idea of method or methodology of how the problem we have should be explained through methodology does not really take place there. For him, it's always a reconstruction of what, you know, we find ourselves in this situation because of a certain history. And it is very important to recall and to explain that history in order to find where we are. And I wonder whether the fact that we have all become specialists today does not in some way reveal that we have forgotten, okay, that history, that we have forgotten where we, in some way, perhaps even where we come from. All right, that's it.
Thank you very much, Santiago, for this so inspiring, I would say, and enriching and generous speech. I think it will take some time to digest at least half the ideas you introduced. I was wondering regarding Latour's statement that facts alone are useless. I was wondering whether we have in reality facts to sustain the climate change thesis and to sustain also the warning of climate change. And I would ask you if death of a species, we can really see how animal species are disappearing.
Species.
Yeah. Could be, so they are dying. Nature is dying before us. Yeah. Could be a fact as such to sustain climate change thesis.
Okay.
You are an existentialist also, or Heideggerian philosopher, so that could be a point of reflection for you as well. Yeah.
So how to interpret species, the disappearance of species as a fact, right? Well, the problem is that you're basically asking, how can a very broad problem can be interpreted as a fact? The thing is that as a good hermeneutic philosopher that follows Heidegger, Nietzsche, in particular Nietzsche, there are no facts. There are no facts. There are only interpretations. Okay? This is Nietzsche, very clear. He was very clear on this. No, there are no facts. The facts are really a social construct that we, in order for a fact to exist, we have to be more or less, we have to agree. I mean, you have to agree with me that I have this in my hand. And if you don't want to agree with me, it's fine. But probably someone who's sitting, Antonio, my favorite journalist, he's so far away, maybe he doesn't see my watch, and well, he might say, no, you know what, I don't see that fact. And and maybe we have to in some way also respect that. So the idea is that when I insist with bringing in Latour and others that, well, we need interpretation to sustain facts, it's because facts by themselves, I repeat, do not work. They disappear. I wonder why so many genocides are forgotten. Well, they're forgotten because we don't sustain them. We don't sustain them through history, through conferences. We don't sustain them in so many ways. My interest is not backward. My interest is forward. In other words, my interest is how am I going to sustain, okay? How am I going to make you believe, okay, in a warning, for example, okay? A warning about, for example, one of the greatest warnings I read that we might face ourselves with is the warning of a very big blackout on the internet. Not like the one we had a few weeks ago that for 2 hours you couldn't post on Mark's social media, but a big one. In other words, that maybe millions and millions of data can be canceled and stuff like that. That would be a very serious, that's probably the most serious emergency we could find ourselves. That it's probably something that is actually quite possible. It's not, we shouldn't even be too surprised for that. So how can we make that become a fact, right? Well, my interest is not to make that a fact. My interest is to make that a warning and to involve you, okay, in a warning, to make sure that, well, at least you're prepared for it. You start printing things like I do. I print everything in case we have one of those blackouts, and also Red Hot Chili Peppers music.
Well, I think I didn't explain myself enough. I was wondering if death is a fact for the human existence, and if we can think of the death of many animal species as such a fact that could sustain that thesis. So we don't need really, that would be like the basis of that.
Preguntas en castellano, así a ver si lo entiendo mejor yo. I don't get it. So perhaps en español quizás me lo... En catalán no, pues no soy tan bueno.
Pues la verdad es que no creo que cambie mucho las palabras, ¿no? Me pregunto si la muerte es un hecho en la existencia humana que nos hace conscientes de nuestra finitud, siguiendo tu propia referencia al filósofo Heidegger, ¿no? Y si podemos tratar la muerte de las especies naturales, animales, como tal hecho en sí, sin tener que ir a interpretaciones para sustentar que realmente hay un cambio climático.
Okay, so I understand now, I'm sorry, but okay, so the death of species, the death of art, the death of God, do we need really to, are the death of God, the death of art, the death of species really facts that we need to experience in order to believe in them? I don't think so. do we really need, because that would be a sort of return into realism also. So I need to experience all these things in order to, I don't know, that's why we have art, that's why we have philosophy, that's why we have history, right? It's a different way of experiencing, and also to going back to them, to being closer to them. So the idea here of experience, okay, is something that I am, as a good hermeneutic philosopher, well, as a radical hermeneutic philosopher, I am very cautious of, because even in psychoanalysis, you know, your therapist might tell you, not yours therapy might tell you, well, it's important that we return to your, you know, your root, your parents and everything. Yeah, but that return is not the real experience, right? That you know, you might remember something, and then maybe your dad tells you, no, it wasn't me, it was your mom, or something like that. So this is why I'm not so interested in, I don't think that it's so important, the experience. What is important is that how we have this experience, what gives, who the artists perhaps give us this experience. That I think is very important. Whether we actually have them, like whether Jesus Christ is really under a rock in Palestine now, it's secondary. It doesn't really mean anything. Much more important is whether the significance that might have. Okay. Probably I didn't answer your question, because it was a very difficult question. So I'm going to thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Santiago.
I try.
Okay, yeah, it works. Well, I was surprised you were actually talking about facts, and you presented it. You cited also Gianni Vattimo, and I was thinking about like the weak mind that is the opposite of the strong mind. In your idea, it seemed that like the facts or what you talked about and you criticized during your intervention, they seemed like strong. They represented the strong mind. And it seemed that you wanted to come back to the weak minds in order to struggle with I don't know, probably struggle is not the right word, but to understand like the emergencies and in a sort of relativism, and we have to prioritize the relativism. This was like I intended. Am I right, or
more or less?
Okay.
In philosophy, there is no right, yes or no. There is always sort of in the middle. So the question is, what relationship does weak thought have with all this stuff? More or less, is this the idea? Yeah. So weak thought, which is the philosophy of my teacher Gianni, and not only him. Richard Rorty declared himself a weak thinker. Charles Taylor declared himself a weak thinker. So it is not only reduced to Jacques Derrida defined himself a weak thinker as well. So it's not only Vattimo. But I don't need to defend weak thought. I am not even interested. I do think that philosophy of warning comes from there, but it's not necessarily the important thing about, because you mentioned at some point in the word relativism, and which I think it's a very important point in your question in relation to weak thought and the things that I was saying. Because do I believe in relativism? Does it really matter? Because any postmodern discourse seems to go in that direction, right? And if you read the cultural supplements like Babelia or La Lettura or Le Monde Livre and all that stuff, that often, you know, there we find this exaggerated title. Postmodernism is dead. It's pure relativism or stuff like that. So trying to overcome that and trying to think in terms of what I don't, anyone who accuses you or accuses hermeneutic philosophers of relativism, I find it a very poor theoretical accusation. It doesn't really mean anything. I mean, believing it, no hermeneutic philosopher will tell you, oh, it doesn't make no difference whether I believe in this or that. Why? Well, mostly because hermeneutic philosophy, at least and weak thought in particular, okay, and deconstructionism also, these are all philosophers that more or less come after Nietzsche and Heidegger. So they more or less come after what in philosophy we call the end of metaphysics or the end of logocentrism, and there are many other ends we can talk about it. Basically, the idea that in very political and summary making the point very quickly would be basically the end of colonialism, right? So basically we do not have the center, we are not the center of the universe. So the question is, philosophically, deconstructionism, weak thought, and some phenomenology. And why do they overcome metaphysics? Why do they come after this end? Well, they do not come after this end. And this is a point that Vattimo makes, to respond to your question, makes very clearly in several of his books, through Levinas and through others. We do not overcome metaphysics because for theoretical reasons, for we have found out that we have to overcome metaphysics. No, 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 no. It is for ethical reasons. It is ethical reasons that require from us. And it would be, even if I ask Andrea here, that maybe there are other artists, but if I ask any of the other artists here, oh, you do your art because you have found the reality. No, they probably do it. There's some sort of ethical, political, even existential probably reason there, okay? Now, that's the difference. That's the difference between a post-metaphysical philosophy and a philosophy that is not post-metaphysical. Truth or rationality here is secondary. It is much more important what I was trying to convey about the idea of being open to listen to an event, which is something that Heidegger, of course, anticipated with the idea of Andenken. But I will not go into show off with Heidegger. And Antonio Moschella.
Yeah, I have a question. But like, do you think that after this pandemic, people can be more aware about climate change and, quoting Nietzsche, finally breaking the veil of Maya of people that are now aware they're really provoking this issue?
Well, I don't know. I hope I think it will be very difficult that no one's sensibility has been touched by this pandemic as far as global climate change is concerned. My worry is not whether we're finally, as far as things are moving on now, it doesn't seem to me we have learned much. I'm quite pessimistic here. I am not so convinced that, there might be a comeback of Trump in 3 years. There might be a comeback of more right-wing populists who want to deny. And as far as our own, I think that the Planetary program here in our university, it's a very clear indication that it's a clear indication of a warning, and that we have anticipated this in some way. Well, not we, but Jaume and the other task force. My concern is not so much whether we will change after this pandemic or as this pandemic ends, but rather what we will continue. What do we understand by change here? Because big political changes, I don't see them in the horizon. I see in the horizon an even further intensification of the measures of control, everything that I talked before. My hope is that there is going to be a sort of reevaluation, perhaps, of some of our priorities. But this will depend on the economic, social situation in which we are in, because as soon as we find ourselves again in another economic crisis that I think it's looming, it's coming soon, I have a bad feeling that things will not change for the best. This is why, to respond to my friend Andrea, yes, only art can save us, actually. In this situation, okay, where the possibilities of returning to basically the same, just like we were 4 years ago, 2 years ago, it is quite big. And in this condition, well, maybe we have to ask art. We don't ask God anymore because we have overcome it a little bit, but art is still there, right? So yes, in some way, this is why I insist on this idea that, well, maybe it is only artists that can rescue us into the emergency. Because I really don't have so much faith that, the pandemic will, Latour talked about this pandemic as a sort of rehearsal for a big pandemic that will come in the future. Maybe, but I wonder whether we will remember this pandemic so long. I remember when I was a teenager in Vienna and the nuclear reactor went off in Chernobyl. Well, we still have a lot of nuclear reactions, nuclear powers not too far from here either. So that could also, let's hope not today at least, the weekend. I want to have a good weekend. So not during the weekend it explodes, but it is possible, right? So, and this, I remember that there was 80 something. So I am not so convinced that, I see a bright future, and I don't want to finish the conference in tragedy, but maybe, yes, only art can save us. This is why Heidegger, who I tried to change because Heidegger said only a God can save us, this is what he meant. Okay, his response was a response to the fact that things will not change for the better. Okay, most probably. I'm not sure I answer your question, Antonio, but I'm not doing a good job today with answering.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So thanks a lot. It was really, wonderful talk with a lot of thought-provoking questions. And actually, when you were speaking, I was thinking this idea of philosophy of warning. So all the history of philosophy interpret as a philosophy of warning. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of another word, it's wonder, like thaumazein. So no, what is the difference? Because now, as Aristotle said, philosophy start from this wonder. Mm-hmm. And they have something in common. And I was thinking about it because it's like they both have have to cope with a kind of ignorance, like nicht wissen, no? So, and but there is something completely different, because in the warning there is already not just an idea of future, so future avenir, as you said, but also something that is really connected to warning, that is danger. Mm-hmm. So there is a kind of peculiar idea of danger that maybe cannot be in wonder, because wonder, so thaumazein, can be also positive. But in both cases, there is this interruption, and there is actually the hermeneutic heart of your interpretation, no? Because it's like we understand when we misunderstand something, or when there is this interruption. And I found this interruption really actually something powerful. And this is also like kind of comment. It's not, so they have, I'm doing like comments, but also questions. Mm-hmm. So interruption as this, not Bremse, so this idea of Benjamin of, so like revolution, that it's not something that has to go forward, but it's a kind of not Bremse, so a kind of step back in a way. And I found this very, very interesting as you combine it under an hermeneutical point of view, but also in a kind of political, if we can say that, at the end of your speech, in a political way. And I was thinking, just the last point, that maybe just only art can save us, but not just art, but this kind of step back from our expertise, as we said yesterday, this idea of what we are missing. So we are missing this global picture, and this global picture actually can sew together our individual project. Mm-hmm. And we need it. And this is really a political need. And I think that, yes, not just art can save us, mm-hmm. maybe art, science, and our like step back from like a dialogue maybe between our different expertise. Yeah.
Okay, another very difficult question that I won't be able to respond to, but so you mentioned dialogue at the end, right? And I think that's very important there, because the problem is dialogue. The problem is dialogue. The problem is dialogue. Too much dialogues, not enough conversation though. What is the difference between a dialogue and a conversation? Because at the United Nations, they're having wonderful dialogues. The United States says, well, we won the war, so we are 9, you guys are 7, we vote, and we have a dialogue. But a dialogue is like Plato telling the slave, I'm going to show you the dialogue, I'm going to grab you from the hair, show you the sun, just like Bush did with Iraqi, show you democracy. The same thing, that's a dialogue, that's an imposition of violence. One of the two has the truth, right? One of the two has the truth. A conversation is something very different. A conversation, a true conversation, or maybe a dialogue it's supposed to be a true conversation, but a conversation, like Richard Rorty used to say, and also Gadamere, also he insisted very much. Of course, in English, at first, Gespräch was translated as dialogue, and then afterward they changed it to conversation, because what he meant by Gespräch was more a conversation rather than a dialogue. In other words, in a true conversation, which is what we're having now here, of course, because I don't think anyone knew beforehand what they were going to say, and I did a little bit because I prepared a little bit in my talk, but now we're having a conversation, and we're all going to come out from this conversation changed. Maybe someone will be also convinced by something that I said or that they asked me. Normally when one is convinced, you never admit it, right? But maybe you do change in some way. So the problem here for me, it's from a political point of view of what you were saying, Libera, is that we have too much of a politics of dialogue. We have too much of a politics that is in some way, and if you look at one of the reasons why populism has returned, in particular right-wing populism has returned, it's because center-right and center-left parties are not really that different. Okay, perfect example is in the United States, the Democratic and the Republican Party, but also here in some way. The fact that even here in Spain, the socialists and the right PP managed in some way to reform now. What do they want to reform? They want to reform several very important things together, and I don't understand how they could be able to find an agreement because they're so different, right? So this is a problem. So you mentioned a number of things in your intervention, and I want to go back to what you said quickly, to the thing of wonder, right? You said, so there is a wonder there, and there is also a danger. So my concern is, I would be more interested in the danger of the warning rather than in the whether a warning can also be something that wonder that brings you in. I think the danger, the part of the danger here is vital, because we are constantly being rescued from emergencies. We're not rescued into emergencies. This difference is, I think it's vital for all the research that I do, because obviously I'm not requesting here that we actually go and do snowboarding or very dangerous things. That's not the issue. The issue is the certain emergencies which are absent, that we do not even get close to them. Okay, Diana, apparently we saw yesterday, she actually goes on the glaciers and stuff, but my concern is here, how can we get closer to this greatest emergency, which are the great dangers we have, that are the dangers we do not even think about? How do we imagine a politics de l'avenir of what will come, what will emerge? Because the word emergency really has to do with emerge, right? What things that emerge out. And I do think that the fact that our greatest emergencies do not emerge is a problem. It's a serious problem. Okay. I tried.
Okay, of course, as an artist, I cannot say only art can save us, because it seems too arrogant. But of course, this is why I just mentioned that art with other things together can save us. But of course, I believe that on the roles of art in the debate, and I really appreciate when the books arrives that you send to me, to see also quotes of Rancière, and I really believe in the contribution of art in that, and I want to go deeply in what you are saying. And I was also very, I think this definition of art of a warning is or philosophy of a warning is fit perfectly when I say fit perfectly when I was saying that my wall painting, for example, are a pointing operation. It's a warning. To say the wall painting about sea level rise, about desertification, is true. Probably, yeah, it's an art of a warning now that I found it the definition, because thinking about what I was doing with this climate art project, going around looking the problem related to climate change in territory. As a joke in my Instagram, I wrote that there was a climate Cassandra because it was a joke, but then it's true. What I was doing, it was a warning something that is also easy to predict, because after the project in Portugal, there was a big fire after, you know, the desertification is going on. So also something that is happening. And so it was funny if probably I can change this climate Cassandra with the art of a warning in as a statement. And this was but I want to share another things that probably the most warning things that they did was this parade of the end of parade, another one. I didn't show it, but I made this parade in the Museum of Pecci with the flag will break the end. This was a radical statement to say it's gonna finish. It seems something that really a Cassandra, no? Mille mai più mille, something like that. But after the pandemic, I felt that this very dark awareness, like the catastrophic narrative, I decided to abandon the catastrophic narrative in some black future, no? Like before narratives, because I felt that, okay, I was awareing something that it's happened. So we are in the middle of the catastrophe. I have this feeling. So as Anna Singh say, we're in the middle of the ruin, like how to live in the ruin. And so after that, I was thinking how to go after that, and to aware maybe the possible alternative ways of living, and not to abandon these catastrophic scenarios. So I don't know what you think related to that.
Okay. Well, you said many things. One, I think, so I don't know whether this, we are supposed to think catastrophically, we're supposed to think tragically, the fact that I mean, this is already, this is why I insisted before in this idea that, well, this is a starting point. This conference is a starting point for L'Avenir, because you know, we are in some way, we are already, like, I do think we are already in a catastrophic situation, to tell you the truth. We are already there. Unfortunately, I know it doesn't come as news to you, don't worry, but I think we are already in a sort of catastrophic situation. And you know, we are already inside the tunnel, and the train is coming, it's already there. The issue, this does not mean that that all hope is lost, for example. I mean, hope is there only if there is some sort of, you know, some sort of possibility still to interpret, to imagine different ways or different possibilities of, let's say, even emancipation. So when I wrote in this book, Only Art Can Save Us, and if you read the book carefully, you would see that, well, what I mean is that a different realm, a different reality, okay, a different approach towards being, towards reality, is what can save us. What will not save us is the approach we have now. Okay? The approach we have now, that's not going to save us. The logocentric, hyper-rationality, rational approach, scientific, and that's not going to save us at all, okay? And so that actually has created this condition in which we are now. So when Heidegger tells you that, well, we continue to interpret technology the way we do, we will end up by destroying all the landscape that we have, all the lands, right? And he was totally right with that. So this is the idea. The idea is, it's not the catastrophic notion of warnings. The warning is not really a catastrophic announcement. It's really an announcement, as I mentioned before, to pressure you, okay, to change some coordinates. Okay, it is a weak, this is something that has to do with pensiero debole. It's a weak concept, okay? And that's why, and what is so good about weak concept like La traces in Derrida, or even conversation as opposed to dialogue, is that they give you an amount of space, right, to intervene in them. Right? There is an intervention there that you can do in certain concepts that are open enough in order for there to be to manage something with them. Pues como quiera Isabel, ¿no?
There are some
Amanda.
questions still, like for Amanda, then Isabel. There are many still. Oh, Isabel first. Okay, sorry.
There were some comments online of Virginia McKenney, who has had to leave, but had a very interesting comment that you can look at afterwards.
Okay.
And also I invite people who are online to make their comments, because if not, we are really like having it here only. Well, there are so many things to say about what you about your talk, your lecture, but I just was just very fragmented comments, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first one is about your retour à l'ordre. It's not an easy, I mean, it's not a usual expression. Retour à l'ordre is a very connotated expression. No, retour à l'ordre is happening after cataclysm. This post, I would say apocalyptic even, no, post-catastrophic at least. And it is not only at the beginning of the 20th century. And then when you talk about the retour à l'ordre, I see it very clearly, your reference to 9/11 in the political retour à l'ordre, so to say, where we are now. However, culturally and in the realm of arts, for example, how can we put that together? I mean, tell us a bit more about how putting this retour à l'ordre with these only art can save us. Mm-hmm. How can we put these both things together? I have a suspicion that it can be paradoxical. So
mm-hmm.
not
I
even
hope
contradictory, it's a paradox. Right?
I hope so.
And my second question, so you were, and we have long spoken about that, because we have had the time to talk about that around many coffees or visits in our offices. I was surprised that while we agree on this thing that you said about, we have been very nice to science yesterday. I mean, we were like really getting very chevalier, with the science, which we were, and so, but the word emotion came really at the end of your talk. And I think that when we were trying to not balance, but nuancing the idea that maybe emotion would be a way of understanding, that the understanding did not come only of this verstehen, but take the French word for understanding, comprendre, prendre avec, to bring it into me, me as a body, me as emotion, me as feeling, as senses. How would you, because that can be the other way of understanding. So that would be.
Okay, let me start with the second.
But sorry, you say at the very beginning that this was a beginning, that this is conversation is a beginning of a longer conversation. And I think that simply by the interest of what has been said today and yesterday, we really have a long and a huge expand of space to discuss all of us in the future.
Thank you, Isabel. I agree with you, and your question also helped me to perhaps make more sense of what I've been saying. So, conversation. Well, a serious conversation, a true conversation, never comes to an end. There is no end. One is probably changing a conversation, but it doesn't finish. It doesn't end. you probably also, that you always wanted to say something else, and Gadamere insists that one never managed to say everything one wants to say, of course, because language is something that, the being takes place in language. So in some way, a conversation never ends. It's always a continuation. And what is interesting about the notion of conversation is that it, as opposed to dialogue, it's something that, well, it has to continue. It continues even if you don't want to in some way. So I want to relate this to the notion you said that retour à l'art, there was something that, I'm not a historian of art, but was requested to artists after, okay. So the fact that that's the origin of retour à l'art does not mean we cannot use it today. Okay, that's one thing. And retour à l'art, I mentioned retour à l'art, I mentioned 9/11, so politics, I mentioned finance, 2009, and now we have a pandemic. So I mentioned 3 events that in some way intensified a retour to order, which has some sort of parallel in the intellectual world with retour, returning to reality and to realism, even after Kant, who explained pretty clear that reality is useless, basically. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point here is that I do not, if you notice, I do not talk about a retour à l'art in art. Also because it's quite difficult. I mean, there are some artists who I think they make a mistake, but they say, no, new realism, I do art of new realism. And of course, if you do art of new realism, then it's basically the works of art will be finished. So there's no interpretation there. There's nothing, it's pure reality. And the idea, I think, of art in general is that, well, there's a little bit more to reality than just what you think is real. Recently in an exhibition I had to talk to, and some artists put a tree inside the museum, and someone in the public said, no, but the tree is real. The tree now is in the museum. That's a real tree. And I told him, no, that's not the same tree. This is a work of art now. It has nothing to do with the tree that was 2 weeks ago in the forest. It has nothing. Now this is a work of art. You cannot touch it. It has totally different meaning. So it is, the reality there is, so my concern is also, I think it's very difficult to imagine this retour à l'art also from in art in general, right? There's a freedom in art, a freedom of institution. There's a relationship with the institution, which is very different from the relationship we academics have with the institution, that we have to follow more rules. So my idea here is that, yes, only art can save it, also because art is not so engaged, not so framed by the institution as much as other, and this is also bad for artists because they don't get maybe a salary every month like some philosophers. Not anyway. So my concern here is to imagine that, well, art is one of those places where it's a realm, like I like to think in philosophical terms, where the fact that it is not in some way framed by this order, by this return to order, there is more space there in order to perhaps also continue this conversation. And most of all, to point, I mean, why so many artists deal with environmental issues? Why don't we even ask ourselves that simple question, which, by the way, as Isabel mentioned yesterday, is nothing new. In land art, you can go back all the way to as much as you like. So, and even before that, also before land art. So the issue is that, well, they are working so much on environmental issues because, as I believe, they are rescuing us into a greater emergency. Okay, to put it in my vocabulary, if I have one. So they're working on that because it's a response to that. The philosophy of warnings that I try to come up with, that probably will cost my career if I am wrong. There are animal studies, animal philosophy. There are plant philosophy. There is now even insect philosophy. There are some people working on insect philosophy. Well, I think that all of these three and others, they all are really actually warnings philosophy. They are all really actually can easily be reinterpreted as warnings of what will happen, what is happening and what is happening. So in a way, they are involving us. It's a question of involvement. With the word involvement, I will respond to what you said about emotions, because the difference between describing this watch and interpreting this watch, okay, it has a lot to do with emotion. It has to do with the fact that in the description of this watch, I can say it's blue, it is cheap, don't worry, it's cheap. The time is this and that. But the interpretation, and we can all agree, well, it's cheap, it's ugly, whatever it is, but well, it's blue, black. But if we start to decide on issues that are a little bit more interesting, for example, whether it's a beautiful watch or not, whether I see brown, maybe you don't see so much brown, or what is this useful for? Because I like to use it to throw it at someone. So that's when our interpretation comes in, and that's when our involvement comes in. Because when Luther, translated the Bible, which is one of the big moments in the history of hermeneutics, into German, he not only literally created the German language, basically, as Hegel said, but he also had to actually be involved in the translation in order to make, because a translation, no one can do an objective translation. For sure, Google Translator cannot do it, but no translator can manage to do a proper translation, right? A translation, there's always something wrong, but that whatever is wrong there is actually also a contribution to make it better, right? So that's why Julio Cortázar's translation of Marguerite Duras, I think, or book of Marguerite Duras, is probably better than the book of Marguerite Duras. So sometimes a translation can actually bring much more to the thing. So there is an involvement there in interpretation, right? Interpretation is an anarchic, like I explained in my last book, something that involves you in it, right? And in some way, like Battimo explained in one of his books, interpretation is a little bit like a virus. Once you start to interpret, the object itself dissolves in some way, becomes weaker, okay? And Nietzsche also said that, the more you study the origin, the less the origin has force. It becomes more manageable in some way. So there is an emotion that goes on there. And that emotion, I think that the emotion that environmental artists, for example, today I think they try to convey, but I really don't care. I'm going to say this. I always say this at conference and everybody hates me after I say this. So I don't really care what artists think of their work of art. And I'm not saying this against Andrea or anyone. No, I don't think it's that important. Not that they do not understand the work of art. Of course they do. They understand it like I understand in my book. It's the same thing. But, the work is there also when they are not there. In other words, the work is there, it's an involvement, okay? And in particular in environmental art, you can see that there is an involvement there, a request for you to become an interpreter of the work, right? So, and all they have to say about the work is really the work. And this is something that I think it's important to take into consideration, because otherwise we'll return to some sort of order that, you need the artist there to explain to you the work of art every time. No, you don't. And actually a good work of art probably is the one that, it's done in such a way that maybe it's not easy to understand it or interpret it right away, but it will involve you, right? It's a question of involvement. And involvement has more to do with emotion than probably rationality, because none of the economists or biologists over there or chemists out there will tell you, oh, I became a chemist just because, rationality, I found out I would make money. No, probably he was interested in it from he was young age, or his parents or something. There's a history there, right? There's an involvement there that in some way, what Gadamere called prejudice, brings you towards that. So involvement here is vital. And I prefer even to talk rather than emotion of involvement. I think that I'm interested that scientists manage to explain to me climate change in a way that I become involved, not that I understand its that data.
How many questions are there still? Amanda and two more. Do you think you could answer a bit briefly? Yeah. No, thanks.
Maybe, yes, please answer this in short form. No, it's going to be a little bit of a long question, but thank you so much for this. And even I actually also paused on the notion of emotion and Greta Thunberg, especially because she's autistic, and emotion is actually not, it's more like there's an obstruction of emotion there. But I like what you're saying, especially about the kind of the viral interpretation, and especially vis-a-vis a community of interpreters. But I wanted to ask, I also wanted to ask about the question of, you said at one point, and I wanted to inquire more about this. Those who did not listen to the warning are responsible. And so I'm thinking through what is happening as we are supposing we can be saved into emergency. Is there and I'm thinking about the question of responsibility. So certainly, if in the absence of emergency, there are warnings, and then there are those who have a kind of ignorance or a non-hearing, they don't heed the warning. And I have been thinking, I do think about Hannah Arendt and essays on understanding and the relationship of understanding to judgment. So is there a judgment assumed in the event horizon of emergency? And I'm thinking Donna Haraway has gone to Hannah Arendt and to the Eichmann trial, and this moment of, and this is where it relates to the future. It's not, it's not whether or not he was guilty. It's not whether or not the Holocaust happened. It's how can we judge this, the banality of evil. Mm-hmm. And this is what Judith Butler writes about, that Hannah Arendt can't, refuses to say he should be put to death by the nation state, and that's not enough. She has to sort of in a flourish convene an assembly from the future. But she does this in a way that, or at least according to Butler, because the judgment is not enough. It's not enough to just put him to death so that he, in a sense, is the scapegoat for the entire Holocaust. But it strikes me that that was a very powerful move, that let's convene a judgment for, from all the people who could not be born because of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. But not just them, but all other peoples as well, a kind of heterogeneity of the future. But it strikes me that when you say, this is not to rescue us into emergency, is not to prevent further ones from happening, I would like to hear some more Arendt. Why not save us into emergency so that, like on behalf of the extinctions, those animals who will never be again, like where is the judgment? And not a kind of retribution, not the violence of resentment or retribution, but as some kind of, I'm questioning, what is this body of the social? Where, what is it about the social? At one point you said as well, only the social character of science makes it credible. And so this is where art could save us into emergency in a way that science can't. Mm-hmm. But I have a question about a judgment, maybe what would be a communist judgment if you're going with something like this is a political concern with perhaps a different kind of realism of emergency, or more like what is happening in the event horizon of emergency that, because it strikes me that could be there. That could be there. Maybe it should be there. Like there's my, maybe it's too moral a judgment, but it strikes me there could be a comeback. Thank you.
Okay. Well, moral judgment. You ended up I was waiting for the word. When is morality going to come in the question? And finally,
I'm with ethics, but it's a little bit of a provocation. How would you
it's fine. I love provocations. So I was waiting for when you were asking your excellent question, insightful question. I said, okay, when is morality going to come in here? I'm waiting. If you wouldn't have said anything, it would have worked better, but for me. So you're right. Well, I am a little bit, I feel uneasy. Judgment, what? From who? Because judgment is always a very, wait. So judgment, who judges? Why? This is a problem. And it actually was also a problem at that trial, by the way, right? Because who is judging here, right? Israel, United Nations, who is it? Not that he shouldn't have been judged, of course. But so back to your question more generally. So the question you're asking me is, well, the judgment within the warning. Well, I don't know. This is not, it seems to me there's a sort of return to realism in your own question. In other words, well, of course it can happen. And the warning, it's probably a warning because it's probably going to happen. I mean, the warning is not for, it's definitely not going to happen. This is a warning. That doesn't work, right? So in a warning, it's more an event rather than an object, probably, whatever the emergency is. So it's something that will happen in certain particular ways. I mean, I think the pandemic we were waiting for was a virus from Russia glaciers or something, permafrosts, rather than from China. But anyway, they got it more or less right. So my concern is that when I hear this ethical moral question, there's always a problem of authority here, right? Of moral authority. You know, one has to judge this. I'm not so sure if this is even necessary, to tell you the truth, because questioning the judgment is already a judgment, right? So you're already putting yourself in a certain particular position, right? Very anti-hermeneutical, I would say also. And in some way, there's a level, because another way, and I do this just to save myself, to come out of this the right way, let's say. A lot of people ask me, well, how can you level different emergencies we have? Why is one emergency higher than the other? And my only form I have to respond to that is, well, it's a question of, the ones that are less disclosed are the most important ones. The ones that we do not see at all are the most disclosed ones, right? So that's a way, but that would also be a sort of judgment on my part on emergencies, right? So the issue of judgment, I think it also has a lot to do with what I mentioned a few minutes ago about overcoming metaphysics. Now, when we talk about overcoming metaphysics, overcoming logocentrism and all that, the big problem there is not so much, I mentioned why we do it, right? But the question is believing that one can overcome metaphysics. That's a big problem, right? That's because when Nietzsche said God has died, he also added, and we wish many more gods to live, right? Or when he says there are no interpretation, only facts, and this is also an interpretation. So the idea is metaphysics cannot be overcome, right? Logocentrism cannot be overcome once for all, okay? This is why I tend to be very careful, and Derrida makes this very clear with the idea of difference, that you cannot overcome metaphysics. You cannot create a total, this is why every time I go to the new school, the students are very angry with me, because I always tell them, no, Occupy, social movement, you're not gonna make it. And they go, wow, of course we can, of course. No, because I don't believe in the idea of total revolution. I don't believe in the idea of total alternative, but I do believe in the idea of an alteration. Okay? An alteration is something different, right? An alteration is not more moderate. It can be also very violent, but it's different. It's more, and it has to do with the idea that we cannot overcome metaphysics. We cannot, for example, overcome our linguistic structure or our historic, Catholic, traditional Western history. You cannot overcome that. It's impossible. Right? That's why Benedetto Croce insisted that we cannot but call ourselves Christian. He said Christian, not Catholic. So he was quite right there. So my concern with the judgment is also there, that how do I, the question of judgment also requires that I am actually making a judgment. I can actually make a judgment. I'm making a judgment like a judge, right? It seems that he's someone neutral, right? That he's not going to be, won't have any prejudice. Of course he does. There's no judge who doesn't have any prejudice. It doesn't exist, right? Even though in Italy we write la legge uguale per tutti, but it's not particularly Berlusconi. But it's a very difficult question that I try to answer, but I'm getting very difficult. Did you come prepared? Did you hack my computer and read my conference? Because you come excellent questions today. It's very tough.
There are still two questions.
Right?
I would suggest
a few easy ones.
To take them both, and then you answer both altogether. If
whatever you say, Paul.
Yeah. Then you please ask both first, and then Santiago will answer. Gracias. Thanks.
Okay.
And then we'll finish for sure.
My question came from Andrea's paper. He said that related to Venus, that the problem was too big to think about it. And I was thinking about your definition on prediction and warning. And it seems like when we talk about prediction, there's a lack of emotional response.
Mm-hmm.
And you said also that the response to warning, or why art was so important into the response of warnings, it was about emotions. So I was thinking, because that was a question, it came out in the conference, why do we ignore warnings? It could be because we understand warnings as predictions, so we don't have the possibility to have a emotional response.
We don't understand
warnings as predictions,
right?
Which it happens actually. In some countries, okay, in some countries with COVID, they were talking about it was just, there's nothing we can actually do, so let's just not do anything. Which happened in Latin America, for example. So I was just
warnings and prediction. Okay, thank you, Ariana.
I do my questions first. Okay. It's much more broader questions and short ones. We were talking about emotion and involvement. And my first question is, do you think involvement in the sense of emotional relatedness is needed in order to understand or perceive warnings? That's question one. And also something that crossed my mind, that was when you were talking about conversations and dialogues. I asked myself the question, well, maybe should facts be considered as conversations, maybe? What is your, this was a question that crossed my mind, and I was curious how you would respond.
Can you repeat that last question?
Yeah, so should facts be considered as conversations in order to keep them alive?
Okay, let me try to respond. That's it? That's one more question? No,
that's everything, yeah, that's all.
So let me try to respond and finish. I think the relationship between both questions, which are excellent questions, has a lot to do with, well, predictions, warnings and predictions on one side, interpretations and facts on the other. And this is what quite broadly, I think Heidegger would call the ontological difference. In other words, there is a space there. There's a space between that some people, that Vattimo interpret this as religion, that Levinas interpret this as ethics. In other words, there's a space that is neither subjective or objective, right? There's a sort of a different realm, which hopefully is the one where art works, that it's a sort of, there's a space there that something can happen. Now, our logocentristic and metaphysical tradition, Descartes and all these people, they try to make these things as separate as possible. You know, like, you don't need to, you know, you have to take away all your judgments, for example, all your tastes, all your prejudice, and you have to look at this as objectively as you can. Not even a surgeon managed to do that, or a dentist, because while he's fixing his teeth, he's probably thinking, this philosopher is useless, right? And while he's thinking that, he's probably thinking about my job or something. So the idea that this idea that I never thought about it, which is a good idea. So maybe facts can be in some way substituted by a conversation. I would say that facts are in a way a conversation. We're never really done with facts, right? You never did, even when you have surgery, you know, well, the surgery is over, you feel better, but you still have a scar, for example, or maybe a little tension sometimes, or you remember that you had the surgery, or even if you go for 20 years to a psychoanalysis, not me, you go to 20 years to a psychiatrist, and you know, you solve all your neurotic problems, and then it's finished. Now I ended up, I finished all spending all this money, and now I don't have any more neurosis. No. You will continue to have some neurosis. You'll be able to more or less cope with it by using a lot of disinfectant and stuff like that. So my concern here is that the relationship between, we have to overcome in some way our facts. We have to overcome the notion of facts. We have to overcome the notion also of predictions. And the way we can overcome them is by at least keeping in mind what interpretation mean, or what warnings and interpretation means in general. So the idea also, I think all this comes a lot from Vattimo, who had this idea that we have to weaken as much as possible reality. So we have to weaken as much as possible everything we see, also for the possibility and for the actually even saving power, I would say, of change, right? It's very important there to be always a possibility of coming back to. This is why archives, for example, are so important, because the archive is the classic space, or a space where you're never done with it. It's never finished. Right? In archives, you can always find something new, right? And in history, you can always find something new. So at the beginning, we talked about understanding and what and how we, with Isabel, we tried to change the idea of understanding through this conference. And this conference is, of course, and this is interesting, but I don't know who is online, but this conference was actually directed toward the scientific community of this university. And this is something important to keep in mind, because when one writes something, or even when one does a work of art, you want a certain audience, you have a certain preferences. You do hope that, oh, I hope Bob will come because, well, in our case, our interest was the scientific community that thinks that of our university and of, in general, Barcelona, that believes that, well, we are useless in the humanities, right? Historian is useless. Sociologists might even be useless as well, right? And instead, the reason they believe this, and the fact that they are not here, is a clear example of a great emergency, okay, of an absence of emergency, okay? It's a very big emergency, the fact that they're not even here to listen, not to me, but maybe to Paul, to Libera, to everyone who participated, and to all your questions as well. So the absence of their absence here is already an emergency, okay, that the social cultural dialogue we have does not take into consideration other forms, or for example, understanding climate change through art and aesthetics.
Thank you very much, Santiago, again, and all of you as well for coming and asking such interesting questions.
Thank you.